Jefferson's slave, Sally Hemings. At midnight Eastern, our President series continues with a look at the nation's fourth president, James Madison. After that, an interview with our current president, Bill Clinton. Earlier this year, C-SPAN profiled the nation's third president, Thomas Jefferson, as part of our American Presidents programming. We traveled to Monticello, Jefferson's famous home just outside Charlottesville, Virginia. There we spoke with authors, Monticello's staff, and the president of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation about Jefferson's life and times. This program lasts about 2.5 hours and begins with a brief video biography on his life.
Of all the cankers of human happiness, none corrodes it with so silent, yet so baneful a tooth as indolence. Idleness begets ennui, ennui the hypochondria, and that a diseased body. Thomas Jefferson, 1787.
Thomas Jefferson was seldom idle. A lawyer, farmer, and statesman, he also had a working knowledge of botany, meteorology, and mechanical engineering. As an architect, he designed Monticello, a majestic home on a Virginia mountaintop built on land he inherited from his father. He was an eloquent writer who at age 33 drafted the Declaration of Independence, and an innovative artisan who furnished his estate with such handcrafted novelties as rotating shelves and a dumbwaiter. When he was 76, he founded the University of Virginia, designing both its buildings and curriculum. He even drew up plans for his own tombstone. He was from Virginia, where he attended the College of William and Mary, and later served as governor. Tall and slender, Jefferson had freckles and red hair. His voice was soft and low, and he frequently sang to himself under his breath. He played the violin, relished vegetables, and collected books. As the nation's third president, Jefferson served 2 terms from 1801 to 1809. Aaron Burr was his first vice president, George Clinton his second. He was a demure commander-in-chief, following a pattern set years earlier when he was a delegate to the Continental Congress. His colleague John Adams said he'd never heard Jefferson utter 3 sentences together. In part because of his quiet nature, but also because he believed that the president ought to be inconspicuous, Jefferson delivered only 2 speeches while in office, his 2 inaugural addresses. And though he would occasionally stop to chat with constituents on his daily horseback rides through the woods outside Washington, he would sometimes ride away before they knew who he was. He was a gracious White House host, however, and was the first president to welcome guests with a handshake rather than a stiff bow, the greeting favored by his predecessors. Jefferson had been a widower for about 18 years by the time he became president. When he was 28, he married Martha Wales Skelton, who died after they had been married 10 years and of whom no portrait is known to exist. Jefferson was devastated after her death, grieving in near seclusion for 6 weeks. Of their 6 children, only 2 lived to maturity. When Jefferson took office, the eldest, Martha, served for a short time as official White House hostess. After the presidency, Jefferson returned to Monticello, where he treasured spending time alone in his personal library, and enjoyed playing games on the West Lawn with his 11 grandchildren, who came to live with him. In retirement, Jefferson also continued to renovate and farm Monticello. He had a lot of help. In a given year, he owned about 200 slaves, almost half of them under the age of 16. He freed 2 in his lifetime and 5 in his will, all of them related to Sally Hemings, a slave with whom he strongly suspected of fathering a child. Jefferson had expensive tastes, which contributed to the debt he had in part inherited and in part accrued in the face of a national economic downturn. Toward the end of his life, he owed well over $100,000. He sold his collection of books to the government for nearly $24,000. But when he died, Monticello and everything in it still had to be sold to pay his creditors. Like John Adams, Jefferson died on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He was buried during a simple ceremony at the Monticello family cemetery. He was 83.
You're looking at Monticello on a very sunny day without the fog that we have here this morning in Charlottesville, Virginia. On this April 2nd, 1999, over 550,000 people visit this home every year. And people from all over the world. There are some 9 languages the material that they have here at Monticello is translated into. That's a live picture on your screen. You can see visitors coming up the east front of the residence where Mr. Jefferson lived for so many years. We'll find out more about that as the program goes on. We will be here talking for the next hour and a half with Dan Jordan, who's the director here at Monticello, and Andrew Burstein, who's the author of The Inner Jefferson, Portrait of a Grieving Optimist. And finally, in the last segment, Annette Gordon-Reed, author of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy, and others will meet as the program goes on. As we look there at the west front, which is on one side of your nickel, if you've never paid that close attention to it, we asked Dan Jordan, who's the director here at this home, if Thomas Jefferson were sitting in this room, what do you think he would be like today?
Well, first of all, Brian, I think Thomas Jefferson would applaud C-SPAN and that he could connect with your audience because he loved good conversation, he loved ideas, and he loved books. So I think there would be a lot of conversation if you were visiting and Thomas Jefferson were here.
Andrew Burstein, how about you? What would you think Mr. Jefferson would be like today?
Jefferson was an easygoing man. He was very comfortable greeting people who came to Monticello. He was hospitable. He also was a profoundly shy man. He didn't like to address audiences, but he was marvelous across a dinner table. So I think that having a conversation with Jefferson at dinner where people boasted that his range of knowledge was extraordinary, that's, I think, the sort of thing that we would be struck by still today.
As we said, this is the third in a series of 41 programs that we're going to do on each of the presidents. And the other part of it, it's American presidents' life portraits. So we focus a lot on their lives and what they were like. Dan Jordan, how long have you done this?
I've been here 15 years, and no 2 days are the same. Thomas Jefferson is the best of company, and I think we learned something at each step of the way.
And Andrew Burstein, how about you? When did you first get introduced to Thomas Jefferson?
The way I came to Jefferson studies is a bit odd. I majored in Chinese in college and found myself doing business in China through the late 70s and most of the 80s. And I think I saw the underside of Chinese society and found myself reading Jefferson's writings while fog-bound in airports in places like Chongqing and Urumqi and the remote corners of China. And so after around the time of the Tiananmen massacre, I defected to the West, I guess you could say, and I traded in my Eastern specialty for the study of Jefferson. And perhaps my fascination with the Chinese language caused me to take a particular interest in Jefferson's use of language, Jefferson being perhaps the most passionate writer of the American myth, the national pride that why it is that Americans feel that Jefferson still resonates. It's because he had a way of capturing the English language that was unique in his generation.
Take a look, Dan Jordan, outside and tell us what we're looking at. We have cameras on the east and the west, and how often do you get fog here?
Well, my wife Lou and I are privileged to live on the mountaintop as well as work here, and fog is not unusual this time of year, and it's extraordinary because as it lifts, it reveals components of a landscape. So it's like a motion picture in Technicolor. But Jefferson had about 5,000 acres, and the foundation owns about 2,000. Monticello is on a mountaintop, so we have a spectacular vista in most directions, one that Jefferson would have appreciated. The Blue Ridge sets the backdrop. We're looking now at the West Lawn, and Jefferson organized flower gardens on a serpentine path. He felt that you would have more visual pleasures if the road were not straight. That's the west portico, as you mentioned earlier, on the nickel, and I think that's probably the most familiar image of Monticello itself. I might add that Monticello is the only home in America on the World Heritage List, That's a UN compilation of treasures that must be protected at all costs, and we're on there with the Great Wall of China and the pyramids of Egypt, which puts it in perspective, I think, pretty quickly.
Professor Burstein, not Bernstein, when did you first come to Monticello? You remember?
I first came to Monticello when I enrolled as a graduate student at the University of Virginia in 1991. But I just wanted to add that as I was walking up from the C-SPAN bus, just up the walk to the house this morning, I was listening to the strains of a mockingbird, and it seemed perfect for this moment because this was Jefferson's favorite bird, and while he had a pet mockingbird for many years of his life, he had one perched on his shoulder that people who visited him in the president's house sometimes commented on. And one woman, Margaret Baird Smith, wrote that Jefferson loved that bird as if it were his child. He had a fascination with, I've called this place his well-ordered dream world. And listening to the mockingbird this morning reminded me of Jefferson's love of nature.
Dan Jordan, you told me something yesterday that connects with last week. First, that David McCullough, who was our guest last week during the Adams special up in Quincy, Massachusetts, came here when he was a kid. But you also said that 100,000 kids a year come here.
We believe kids are the future, and we're very pleased that about 100,000 school children come to Monticello annually. And it's our sense if you can plant a seed that it will grow. And what's more important than an appreciation for one's history? David McCullough, who is a trustee at Monticello, related to me that his parents brought him from Pittsburgh to Monticello when he was a kid, and it kind of sparked his interest in history from that point forward.
You can see on the screen that there are some tourists here this morning. Kids are at their Easter Passover recess, so there'll be visitors all throughout the program as we do this on a Friday morning. Let's take a little look at the career of Thomas Jefferson. In 1769 to 1774, he was in the Virginia House of Burgesses. From 1775 to 1776, he was a delegate to the Continental Congress, and in that period also wrote the Declaration of Independence. And from 1779 to 1781, he was the governor of Virginia. And from 1785 to 1789, he was a U.S. diplomatic minister to France, as you can see there on the screen. We want to get you involved. This is a man that a lot of people in this country know a lot about. We want to go to those phone calls. We'll have the phones on the screen so that you can begin dialing. As you know, our area code is 202, and the prefix is 624. If you live in the Eastern and Central time zone, it's 1111. If you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zone, it's 1115. Andrew Burstein, when you studied him, Mr. Jefferson, up close and personal, what did you learn about him?
Well, I learned that he was a self-expressive letter writer. He was a man who found it easiest to express his thoughts by writing letters. Rather than spontaneously, he sat at his desk in his sanctum sanctorum, as he called it. And he wrote sometimes a dozen letters a day. He kept it's a 656-page index to his letters. Every letter he wrote, every letter he received, and it's cross-referenced by the recipient or writer of the letter. So this was a man for whom the process of letter writing was critical.
Daniel Jurgen, you live how far from where we are right now?
My wife and I live about 150 yards from the main house, and I'm able to walk to work on some occasions, but the most important thing is that we feel totally a part of the Monticello culture and history. And Jefferson is endlessly fascinating. We'd like to say, in fact, that he was interested in everything from A to Z, from architecture to zucchini.
What was a day like for him here?
Well, the day started very early. He said, I rise with the sun, and right off the bat he took a temperature reading recorded in his weather book, took another reading in the afternoon, kept 5 daily journals, if you can imagine that. Then he would put his feet in cold water, and then he would start his pen and ink work, or his letter writing. About 8 o'clock he would join others for breakfast. After that he might return for more letter writing, but at a certain point he would ask for a horse and take a plantation ride. He would come back, join in the second main meal of the day, which was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, if the weather's nice as it is today, he might invite his guests for a walk. And then ultimately he would retire and read, or perhaps more record keeping, or indulge his scientific interest before he went to bed.
We have calls, and we're going to go that way right now to Salem, Oregon. Good morning. You're on with Daniel Jurgen and Andrew Burstein. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. One comment I would like to make is that I find it rather disturbing that with the recent revelations about Mr. Jefferson's possible involvement with Sally Hemings, that to me it seems you have a group of writers and a group of historians who are somewhat trying to discredit Mr. Jefferson based on one aspect of his life, when to me it's very obvious that he, I think, is one of the greatest Americans who've ever lived. I think he's one of the greatest men that history has ever seen. And so I'd like to hear your comment on that. And number two, I'd like to ask you, how political do you feel Jefferson was during his presidency? Do you think he was more motivated by politics, or do you think he was more motivated by his ideas for what he thought that the country should be?
Caller, let me ask you why you thought he was a great man.
I think he's a great man because of just the ideas that he had. When you know, I've read a number of books about him, and I think that as a thinker and as a philosopher, his ideas about freedom and the rights of individuals, just everything about his life, the fact that he was an architect, he was a farmer, he was a politician, he was president, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. I think he inspired many, many people throughout the world to the ideals of freedom.
Okay, thanks. Andrew Burstein?
Yeah, Jefferson was a virtuoso, and I don't think anyone would dispute that. His relationship with Sally Hemings, which has been prominent in the news recently, makes him more intriguing. It makes him a human being with flaws. In studying his letters, I find that he was a man of sentiment, a man of feeling. But obviously he didn't disclose everything. No one does. He had a hidden side to him, and this makes him more interesting, I think, yet as a biographical subject. On the subject of his politics, particularly in the presidency, Jefferson was a bitter partisan, no less bitter than people on both sides of the aisle in the Congress today. He spoke rhetorically of harmony, of we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans in his first inaugural address. But in fact, he spoke to his allies, such as James Madison, about doing in the Federalists. He wanted to see an end to the Federalist Party. He saw two kinds of Federalists, those who could become Republicans and those who were beyond hope, and he wanted to convert them to his brand of politics.
Mr. Jordan, how far are we as the horse rides to Washington, D.C., and then on to Philadelphia?
In Jefferson's day, it would have taken 3 days plus and some bad travel conditions. There were several rivers and no bridges. So it wasn't an easy business being in politics. But if I could respond to the DNA question.
How long would it take to get up to Washington, then on to Philadelphia? Beyond, because he went to Philadelphia a lot too in those days.
That's right. Well, it was an additional several days, so you figure the better part of a week getting from Charlottesville to Philadelphia in Jefferson's day, and bad travel conditions.
How often would he do it?
Well, it depended on the office he held. When he was president, he spent long summers at Monticello, and then would probably make the trip to Washington a couple of times a year.
And from here to Poplar Forest, how long would that take?
In Jefferson's day, to his other home, Poplar Forest, which is a great recreation underway now, would take about 2 or 3 days. It's near Lynchburg, Virginia, to the south of Charlottesville.
You wanted to comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me say about the DNA study that we know all the people who were involved in it, and they're all our friends, and it's very serious scientific work. To us, it's just part of a continuum. We've been interested in African-American interpretation here actively for some 15 years, and we believe you cannot understand Jefferson without understanding slavery. You can't understand Monticello without understanding the African-American community. But I don't think the study will diminish overall and long range Jefferson's legacy. He's still the best advocate we have of our fundamental liberties. And his public career, which lasted for 40 years and included the Declaration of Independence, the Virginia Statute, the founding of the University of Virginia, Lewis and Clark, and much more, will stand the test of time.
Fog has basically cleared off here, and we're going to be able to show you a picture in a moment of Charlottesville from up top on this hill, and then it'll show you how close it is. Those of you who have never been here, there's a picture on your screen right now, which is down below the hills there. We're going next to Arlington, Virginia, for Dan Jurgen and Andrew Burstein. Go ahead, please.
Yes, can you hear me, Brian?
We sure can.
Okay, speaking of great Americans, Brian Lamb is a great American. I've got just several points. Mr. Jefferson founded the alleged University of Virginia down there in Blacksburg. The Lady Hokies knocked off the Lady Wahoos a few months ago in women's basketball to constitute the real University of Virginia. For the two gentlemen, did Clinton go through Monticello in January of '93 on his way to Washington, D.C.? Why was Gorbachev in Monticello April of '93 to celebrate the 250th? What would Mr. Jefferson think of homeschooling if he was alive today? What would Mr. Jefferson think of Clinton's treason and selling arms to China and lying to the American people? Thank you, Brian. Brian, one more thing. Purdue, national champions.
Thank you, Arlington. Dan Jurgen.
Well, let me say to our Hokie fan friend in Arlington that we follow football here as well, and the University of Virginia, Virginia Tech game was very pleasing to those of us in Albemarle. But yes, Mr. Clinton started his inaugural here in January of '93, and I had the pleasure, along with my wife Lou, of taking the Clintons and the Gores through the house. He's a longtime Jefferson admirer. And, you know, aside from politics. Gorbachev was here in the spring of 1993 as well, and he had a remarkable story to tell about how his reading of Thomas Jefferson over the years had changed his mind about some fundamental tenets of the communist doctrine. So it was quite a fascinating revelation and reminded us of Jefferson's international influence.
Mr. Burstein, what do you think he would think of the Kosovo situation if he were around today?
I'm a historian. I'm interested in the historical Jefferson, trying to understand him in his own time.
Would he be in favor of international involvement like this?
Well, he certainly believed that America had a moral responsibility to send a message to the world. He would not have been eager, I think, to take military action. He was more of, I mean, he believed at a time when America was militarily and economically unimportant in the world that this nation held great promise. And he felt that it was more of a moral than a military promise that America had for, you know, doing good in the world.
Vancouver, Washington, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. My question is relevant to Lewis and Clark's trip out here to Oregon. And, of course, about that time, in the early 1800s, France, the British, and Spain all had significant interest in our country. Had that trip not been made, do you think that the United States would have had become the country it has become today in terms of size and strength?
Dan Jurgen, aren't there some antlers out there in the entrance hall that came from Lewis or Clark?
Yes. Steve Ambrose, who wrote a wonderful book, Undaunted Courage, about that voyage of discovery, calls Monticello Mission Control, and rightly so. And there were great trophies from the expedition that ended up back here, including antlers in the entrance hall, and that those objects enable our guides to tell our visitors about Lewis and Clark. Meriwether Lewis was Jefferson's private secretary for a while, as our caller likely knows.
New Canaan, Connecticut, you're next.
Yes, I have a question about Jefferson's attitude towards the French Revolution. Since he was ambassador to France right before the outbreak of the Revolution, and actually was friendly or friends with many of the people who subsequently went to the guillotine, I was wondering if he ever had a statement about the French Revolution and the killing of his former friends and aristocrats in France, and I'll listen to the answer.
Professor Bernstein?
Jefferson had a great friend in the Marquis de Lafayette who fought valiantly under George Washington in the American Revolution. helped smooth the way for Jefferson when he succeeded Benjamin Franklin as Minister to France in 1785. Jefferson anticipated and hoped for a French Revolution that would be similar to the American Revolution, that is to say, one in which Republican principles would triumph and there would be a minimum of bloodshed. He liked the liberal nobility which Lafayette represented. Lafayette was a liberal humanist like Jefferson. So I think that this is what he envisioned for the French Revolution. It became an embarrassment to Jefferson once as Secretary of State under Washington. His anti-administration party, which became the Democratic Republican Party, was targeted by the administration, by the Federalists, as a party of French revolutionary atheists. And it was hard to live down, and the Republicans gained in the Congress initially, but then lost seats in Congress because the French Revolution became violent.
Both of our guests here in the parlor?
We're in the parlor, right, which was a social center of Monticello in Jefferson's day. It's a perfectly natural place for this broadcast.
And both of our guests, I started to say, are graduates of the University of Virginia. They get their PhDs here, both in history. But we have one from New Jersey and one from Mississippi. What's a Mississippi connection with a Virginian?
Well, there are many connections. Dumas Malone, the greatest of all the Jefferson biographers, was from Coldwater, Mississippi. And of course, William Faulkner spent his last years at the University of Virginia as writer in residence.
Where did you grow up in New Jersey?
Well, I actually grew up in the New York area, different places, and I went to a very fine private school called Hackley School, which is celebrating its 100th birthday this year, and I'm still good friends with some of my old teachers.
And where do you teach now?
I teach at the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls, Iowa.
And this is a big day in the life of anybody who is an author. This is the cover of the new book by Andrew Burstein, Sentimental Democracy. In the stores today?
I don't know if it'll be in the stores immediately, maybe another week or so, but today is the official day of publication.
And it's about what?
Sentimental Democracy is an emotional history of America. It's where the passionate language of the revolution continues to be part of the American idiom today. Our romantic self-image, we think of ourselves as a people of feeling, people who are sympathetic and generous in our motives, and this directs American foreign policy. We've seen this already at least twice in the Clinton administration, the benevolent invasion of Haiti and what's happening with NATO as we speak. In Kosovo, everything that Americans do has a language underlying it which it grows directly from the American Revolution. It's that language which I examine in this book.
Mr. Jordan, how big is your foundation? Give us the number of people that work here and the number of dollars in your endowment.
Monticello is owned and operated by the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation, and we're private and nonprofit. We have no governmental ties. It came into being in 1923. The mission is straightforward. It's preservation and education, to save and to share. We have about 250 colleagues, about half are full-time year-round. We have a very strong national board of 16 trustees, including David McCullough, whom I mentioned earlier.
How much does it cost to keep this place running?
The operating budget is $18 million, but it's very expensive to do history right, and that's our goal.
And the entrance fee now?
The entrance fee is $9, and as a matter of policy, we want to be in the lowest 20th percentile of 50 sister sites, because we believe the home of Thomas Jefferson should always be accessible. So we have to pick up the balance elsewhere.
And who is Fraser Nyman?
Fraser Nyman is Director of Archaeology at Monticello. He is a graduate of Yale, has a PhD from Yale, and he has an extraordinary vision for discovering a lost Monticello underground.
Let's find out. He's standing out on the grounds, and it's a very pretty picture on this spring morning. Fraser Nyman, good morning.
Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Where are you?
I'm standing on Mulberry Row in front of the joinery, a large structure in which much of the formal interior woodwork that surrounds you in the parlor was made.
How big was this place in the very beginning?
It was sizable. It was roughly 5,000 acres. Today, the foundation owns the 2,000-acre core of that original 5,000 acres. And fortunately for us, from an archaeological perspective, that core includes the most important agricultural and sites, and agriculture, as you know, is the reason for the existence of this place.
What was it like back then when Mr. Jefferson was here?
Well, a complex question. Maybe the best place to start is to suggest that you need to understand that Monticello is not simply the house. It's this much larger, complex economic and social organization. Monticello was divided up into four what 18th century Virginians called quarter farms. That is, these are four kind of satellite agricultural operations, each of which contained an overseer and a cluster of enslaved Africans and African Americans who worked the plantation, along with livestock and the fields in which these individuals worked. Our major research focus today in archaeology is to try to uncover that aspect of the lost world of the real historical Monticello, to make a step, as Dan suggested, in getting history right, or getting history righter, I suppose.
Where was Thomas Jefferson born?
Jefferson was born at a place called Shadwell, which is about 2 miles east of here. Once Jefferson moved to Monticello, Shadwell became the site of one of these outlying quarter farms. But before Jefferson's move to the mountain in 1770, Jefferson was born at Shadwell. Shadwell was initially established by his father, Peter Jefferson, who moved into Albemarle County in the late 1730s and established a very prosperous plantation there. By the time of his death in 1756, Peter Jefferson owned roughly 60 slaves.
When did you get into this business, and why?
Well, I guess I started out about 20 years ago, and its primary attraction to me was the challenge of making the mute bones and stones speak. You know, archaeologists obviously like to dig up cool-looking stuff, but what really makes me excited is trying to figure out what the cool-looking stuff means.
When we saw, and we're now looking at some of your folks doing some work, we saw them on the screen with different kinds of gear out there. What are they looking for?
Right. Well, this is what you're seeing is our field crew at work at something we call the Plantation Archaeological Survey. This is the first ever systematic attempt to track down, locate, and date all of the settlements that were associated with the real historical Monticello. As you see from the footage you're running, Monticello is no longer a farm. The fields are vanished, and they've been replaced by forest. And this means that archaeological survey is a very labor-intensive business. The way in which we have to find sites is by using what we call shovel test pits. We essentially dig a hole in the ground every single 40 feet, and we use a total station, a fancy digital transit, to map these things in 3 dimensions so we know exactly where we've been. The idea is we screen the sediments and soil that come out of these pits and look for artifacts, and we can go back to the lab then and use the computers to draw maps of the distribution of artifacts across the landscape.
How many people are working on this with you?
It fluctuates. Currently we have in the field a crew of 6 or 7 folks and a permanent staff of 3.
Where are you from originally?
I was born in Williamsburg, of all places, and as Dan said, spent some time in New England and just returned here to Virginia about 3 years ago.
And what's behind you up there on the hillside? What is that area? Who owns that?
That is Brown's Mountain. In Jefferson's day, Jefferson actually referred to it as Montalto, the tall mountain in Italian, as opposed to Monticello, the little mountain. And he owned the face of that mountain, which you see, and in fact contemplated decorating it with various fanciful garden monuments, a plan like many of his plans, which was never realized, but which was in keeping with his interest in in building, I suppose, monumental and spectacular architecture.
Fraser Nyman, thank you very much for joining us.
Appreciate it.
We're going to grab a call. First, we'll come right back to you. We got Highland, California. Been waiting for some time. Go ahead, Highland.
Hello, this is Ed Abramson from Highland, California. I have a three-part question which will dovetail. Number one, I understand from previous readings that Jefferson was involved with the drafting of the Bill of Rights, even though he wasn't, I don't believe, in the country at the time. What was his involvement? Two, what would he have thought of the invasion of the privacy of a president? And number three, perhaps just a historical comment that's always intrigued me. What would, in 18th century language, be considered a high crime and misdemeanor? And I will hang up and listen to your expert's answer. Thank you.
Dan Jordan.
Jefferson was out of the country when the Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia in 1787. His great friend, James Madison, of course, is regarded as the father of the Constitution, later the father of the Bill of Rights. So I think there are some ideological or philosophical influences Jefferson might have had, but he had nothing directly to do with the drafting of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution or the Constitution itself. And here at Monticello, we don't presume to say what Jefferson would think of today's headlines.
Montrose, Michigan, you're next.
Yes, I wanted to say that Mr. Jordan is as pleasant in person as on TV. I had occasion to meet him when we toured Monticello, and something had happened to a tour guide. He started our tour, but my little boy recognized him on TV. I didn't even recognize him. That's that man right there. So you know, he must have made a good impression anyway. My question is, Jefferson had, great knowledge of different languages, and I was wondering if we at the time had a foreign policy, and if so, did he use his knowledge of language to help out in his foreign policy? And I direct the question to Mr. Bernstein.
Thanks. Andrew Bernstein.
Yeah, Jefferson studied Latin and Greek from the time he was very young, the time he was 8 or 9, and often peppered his correspondence with Latin phrases. He also studied on his own French, Spanish, Italian, Anglo-Saxon. When he arrived in France, his French was more book learning than the ability to converse, and so his first year in France, he sort of bumbled, but eventually came to speak and write letters in French pretty well. I don't know that he used the language facility that much in diplomacy, but he certainly collected many, many books in French and other languages.
Not to embarrass the caller, because I do the same thing myself, but there's some name things I want to ask you all about. He made the mistake that we've all made, Monticello. I come from an area that has a Monticello. Where did he get the name Monticello?
Monticello is Italian for little mountain. And you might say, how do we know that, in fact, that's the way it was pronounced? And the answer is that we get, Jefferson had received all kind of letters in which people tried to spell out phonetically Monticello. So we know from Jefferson and from the letters that that's the way it was pronounced.
Also, it's Andrew Burstein, not Andrew Bernstein. I've slipped myself a couple times. Do you get that problem from time to time?
From time to time.
You were going to say something about the letters?
Well, I was going to say about the naming of Monticello that there's one very early reference to this place as the Hermitage, which oddly enough is the Andrew Jackson's home. But it was around 1769 that Jefferson changed the name to Monticello, at which time he was primarily living still at Shadwell with his mother, and there was a fire in 1770 of Shadwell, and that hastened his move to the mountaintop.
Dan Jordan, one last thing, because he also said Dan Jordan, and your name is Dan Jordan. Why the difference?
That's just the way I inherited it, and down south you can get it either way. So when I was in the Army, I got tired of explaining to surly sergeants that I was Lieutenant Jordan, so for a short while I was Lieutenant Jordan, but it is Jordan.
Daly City, California. Welcome to Monticello. You're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Jordan. Elise Martinez here, and good morning to Mr. Burstein, to you too. I read, Mr. Burstein, your book, which I found very, very informative, and I enjoyed reading very much. My question to Mr. Burstein is, can you tell us who you think it was Mr. Jefferson's, or the most important woman in Mr. Jefferson's life, and why? And to Mr. Jordan, could you maybe tell us what changes you have made in the plantation tour in Monticello to incorporate the findings in Mr. Jefferson's life in relationship with Sally Hemings? Thank you very much, and a good morning to you all.
The book Andrew Burstein wrote called The Enter Jefferson is in paperback, and it was out first in 1995. You want to answer the first question?
Yeah. Jefferson surely was very much in love with his wife, Martha Jefferson, and he called her Patty. They read together. I think Jefferson had more of an interest in poetry at the time he was married, and he claimed that he lost that interest as he aged. His wife died after they were married 10 years. He called it 10 years of uncheckered happiness. And we all know that his pursuit of happiness distinguishes him. After her death, he had an infatuation with a woman he met in Paris, the Anglo-Italian artist Maria Cosway, but that was short-lived. They exchanged letters, and some of those letters are very revealing. But probably from this point on, the most important, he would have said the most important woman in his life was his daughter Martha, or Patsy. She had 12 children, 11 of whom survived into adulthood, and she pretty much ran Monticello, served the functions that Jefferson's late wife had served. And though she did not come often to the White House when Jefferson was president, she was a very important part of his life, and their letters express a mutual love that is really wonderful to look at, although you have to get beyond some of the stylized language to understand that there is real deep and abiding affection between them.
Mr. Jordan.
Within 24 hours of the release of the DNA study, we had a press conference with Dr. Foster, who did the study. We had a statement on our website, and we got up to 65,000 hits a day in that cycle, and our guides were talking about the study. In this issue and all others, scholarship drives the program. We have 8 PhDs on the Monticello staff. We have 6 individuals who published one or more books with the University Press. We have our own research library, and we have an International Center for Jefferson Studies. So we think if you take a scholarly approach, you have the best chance of getting history right.
Those of you who have joined us and are watching our series, as you know, there'll be 41 of these, usually one a week, on Friday or Monday, one on Sunday. That's the John Quincy Adams program, but they'll all be repeated at 8 o'clock on Friday evenings, and that will include the other material that we have on during the week. We do this, among other reasons, for educators and for students. And we have an education department at C-SPAN that's prepared to help all teachers out that might want to get involved with our C-SPAN in the Classroom program. It's free of charge. You can see on your screen there, that's the website, the cspan.org/classroom, and then a number to call if you want to get involved quickly, 202-626-4858. You can enroll in C-SPAN in the Classroom either way. They'll send you materials, there'll be lesson plans, and as we go through the year, more materials will be made available. We're having all 41 portraits of the presidents painted by Chaz Fagan. Some of you have met Mr. Fagan in the past. He did our Alexis de Tocqueville statue, and we'll, as time goes on, have a poster available later on. He's not going to finish all the portraits until about May 15th, but we'll show you those as we go along, and you can see them for each president on our American Presidents website. There's Monticello on your screen. There's Thomas Jefferson, and we go next here inside the home to the library. Mr. Jordan, where is that from where we're sitting?
The library is in the south wing of the house itself. Jefferson would have called it a book room. He wrote John Adams, "I cannot live without books." And we are seeing a group of school kids who are seated and calming down and learning about Jefferson's interest in learning itself. He preferred to read everything in the original language, which is extraordinary. He could read in 7 different languages. You'll note that there are shelves, but in fact they're book boxes. So when Jefferson traveled, he could take a crate of books with him. He was surrounded by books all of his life, and he was a lifelong learner.
Which room would he spend the most time with?
The southern wing itself, as Andy mentioned earlier, one guest called the Sanctum Sanctorum. That was private space. Certainly, he would spend a good deal of time in the book room, but connected to it was his office, or what we would call an office. He called his cabinet. And I think that's one of my favorite spaces in the house, and our visitors are walking in that direction now. Jefferson was a scientist, and he kept scientific instruments there, one of the best collections in America. He was an inveterate record keeper, kept 5 daily journals, did a lot of his work there. He did his correspondence there. So the cabinet or office shows Jefferson's powerful mind engaged in topics large and small.
Midland, Michigan, you're next.
Good morning. I would like to first of all congratulate Mr. Lamb on the brilliant job that he's been doing with the whole series. I watch the program quite often. But what I would like to comment about is a lot of the scholars and speakers that have been on the programs have seemingly overlooked the whole notion of the hypocritical or hypocrisy that Jefferson lived in terms of his keeping slaves, probably several thousand of them at one time or another, but also being this supposedly great architect of freedom. These two perspectives on life are totally in a dichotomy with each other, and a lot of the speakers and scholars seem to kind of want to brush that aside. This is very important to a lot of Americans in terms of how can a man write about one thing or another in very lofty terms as far as freedom and that sort of thing is concerned, but yet he has thousands of slaves and even has clandestine relationships with Sally Hemings. Can the speakers comment on that?
Andrew Burstein.
Well, Jefferson was a slave owner, and his life was integrally connected with slave owning. He was comfortable as a slave owner. This we must acknowledge. I don't think he lost a lot of sleep over the slavery issue, although he tried to address it, he thought, as a detached philosopher, objectively. We read what he wrote, particularly one book he published in his lifetime, and it's the ugliest kind of racism you could imagine. But it is looked upon as mainstream in his time. He wasn't criticized, certainly not widely, for anything he wrote in there about the inferior reasoning capacity of the African American and this sort of thing. I think that when we indict Jefferson as a slave owner, we have to remember that we should really indict the entire generation, that at least when he was a young man, at the time he drafted the Declaration of Independence, he made an effort to insert a long paragraph in which he said that the tyrant King George III had waged war against a people who had not offended him, that slavery was an unnatural thing and that it was foisted upon Americans. He was brought up with it. He had a conscience. On the other hand, probably John Quincy Adams said it best, that on this issue, Thomas Jefferson did not have in him the capacity to martyr himself. So Jefferson made an attempt to deal with slavery, but ultimately he was a Southerner, and he was able to rationalize that economically it was impossible for him to get out from under his debts, and that he wasn't economically able to liberate his slaves. It's a short answer, but it's part of the answer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to satisfy people like this? Because we get this call, as you know, all the time.
Sure. No, it's a central paradox, not only with Jefferson, but with the American people. And I think in Jefferson's case, that he was ahead of his times in so many ways, but he was of his times on this issue. And I wanted to assure the caller that we deal with this every day at Monticello, and if he comes to the mountaintop, I hope he would take one of our slave life tours. it's part of reality in studying Thomas Jefferson.
Sausalito, you're next.
Good morning. I have a couple of questions, and the first one is, how many times did Jefferson go to Paris? And when he went to Paris, did he arrange financing for the country? And if so, with what houses, what financial houses? And if it's known, who bought? Where did Jefferson buy his slaves?
Jefferson spent 5 years on diplomatic service in France, and it was a transforming experience for him because he had to deal with the French government anxious to collect the loans it had made to America in the Revolution. He said it was an excellent school of humility.
Did he go just once?
He was in Paris for the better part of 5 years.
But just one time?
Right. Went across the waters only once. In terms of where he bought his slaves, he inherited most from his father, and then another large number of slaves when he married.
How old was his father when his father died? I mean, how old was Thomas Jefferson when his father died?
Thomas Jefferson was only 14 when his father, Peter Jefferson, died.
How about his mother?
Mother lived longer. She died in 1770.
We have a camera in the study. What's that?
The study would be what we would call an office. It's in the southern wing or the south wing, and we're looking at it from the outside. The window that we're seeing is into the book room. Just above it is a bedroom. From a distance, it would appear to be one room. That's a scientific instrument, and Professor at Harvard told us not long ago Jefferson had one of the best collections in America. That's the cabinet, or we would call it an office, and that's Jefferson's bed. So he could roll out on either side. It was an alcove. If he went in the direction of the image on the screen, he ends up right in the middle of his office. He was very clever about gadgets to make his pen and ink work easier. In fact, the Wall Street Journal did a story in 1989, and it said, in terms of organizing an office, that since Thomas Jefferson, it's all been downhill. There are also some wonderful windows and wonderful views from the cabinet. That's looking to the west and also to the south.
I drove down here yesterday, and for those of you who have never been here, it's exactly 130 miles, I think, from downtown Washington, D.C., which it isn't too much closer if you come out of the airport there, or Dulles airports. You probably save 25 miles or so. And when you look at your visitor list out of 550,000 you have here every year, is there any way to give us the demographics of them and where they come from?
We have 550,000 visits annually. We do quarterly surveys, so we've got a pretty good handle on the demographics. I would say that our visitors are pretty much like the C-SPAN audience, and that is they typically are very well educated, they're fluent, they're widely traveled. And it's fun for me, living and working here, to walk around the grounds, and you pick up different accents and different languages. And I enjoy just going up and having conversations with people.
Do either one of you have a website, by the way?
Monticello has a website of which we're very proud, and it's won many awards. We get about 16 to 20,000 hits a day. We have lesson plans on there. We have a big section on, since some of the calls had to do with Sally Hemings, we have a section on Sally Hemings and the Hemings family and the like.
What is it?
It's well, I'm technophobic, and I'm listed in the credits as being technophobic, but I think it's www.monticello.org. Does that sound?
.org?
Yeah, .org.
Gotta have a dot in there
Thanks.
somewhere.
.org. Yeah.
I didn't know there was anybody worse than me at this.
I still use a pencil, but that's just me. But our friend David McCullough, as you know, types all of his manuscripts on an old upright typewriter.
We also will connect you through www.americanpresidents.org to the Monticello website. Alito, Illinois. Thanks for waiting. You're next.
Good morning, gentlemen. This is indeed a big event to talk to Monticello this morning, one of the great landmarks not only of this nation but of the world. I'm glad you put the biography of Mr. Jefferson on the screen a while ago. I keep forgetting that he was a governor of Virginia, and Virginia certainly had some and has some great governors throughout its very interesting history. My question is, how many visitors in a given year visit Monticello?
Well, thanks. 550,000. They come from all over the world.
Is that going up or down in recent years?
We're fairly stable, and we don't do much traditional advertising because we give individualized tours, and you can see on the screen one of our excellent guides We have no volunteers. They're all employees of the foundation. And we would prefer to give the tours in groups than have people just walk through. So we're happy with the number during the season. We would love to have more in the off-season, say the wintertime.
Andrew Burstein, as you've gone through your research on Thomas Jefferson, when do you have the most fun yourself?
Well, those rare instances where, for example, at the Library of Congress, I was able actually to read original Jefferson letters, to hold them in my hands, letters between Jefferson and James Monroe, who incidentally had a horrible handwriting. But Jefferson's handwriting is very easy to read, and he recommended to his grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, that he copy that handwriting. It's a very Republican handwriting, low, no flourishes, and as I said, very easy to read. So reading Jefferson, holding those documents in my hand, and there are some also at the University of Virginia Library, was a marvelous experience, obviously.
Any idea, Dan Jordan, what his voice would have sounded like?
Yes, but let me correct a mistake I made earlier. Jefferson's mother died in 1776. I said 1770. That's when the house in which she lived burned, but she lived a little longer. Yes, we've got a lot of recordings from the time, not, of course, of the voice, but of the way people described the voice. It was sweet. It was fairly low. He was not a public speaker. And in fact sent his major messages to be read in Congress. But that was not unusual in that day and age. There were a few Patrick Henrys around, but the typical politician was not flamboyant on the hustings at all.
Boone, North Carolina, you're next.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. I recently found out that one of my ancestors, Dr. Thomas Walker, had been a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson, and Dr. Walker is credited with the discovery of the Cumberland Gap. He was a surveyor from the Morganton, North Carolina area, and I was wondering if any of you gentlemen there had ever heard of Dr. Walker's friendship with Jefferson, and if there might be some archival information I could possibly access to learn more about that particular part of my ancestry.
Thanks. We're going to talk about descendants before the program's over, but roughly how many are there in the United States? Do you know, Danger?
Yes, there are 2,000 or 3,000 descendants of the daughters Martha and Mary, and they come annually for a reception and a program. They'll be here in May. And Dr. Thomas Walker is very well known, and the caller could contact us. We'd be glad to share information.
Mr. Burstein, have you been to Poplar Forest?
Actually, no. I visited the Natural Bridge, which Jefferson owned, which is down in that neighborhood of Virginia, but I haven't been to Poplar Forest.
On your screen is Poplar Forest, which is about how long a distance by car from here?
It's about an hour and a half south of Charlottesville, near Lynchburg, Virginia. Jefferson inherited the property from his father-in-law by marriage, had a large plantation there, had a number of slaves there, and built a kind of retreat home starting in 1807 or thereabouts. It's an octagonal house, Brian, right down to the privies, which are outside on the grounds. And many of the interior rooms are also 8-sided. And Jefferson would go, as he grew older, a couple of times a year and spend a couple of weeks, bring some grandchildren with him and lots of books to get away from the hustle and bustle of the mountaintop. And
what you can't see on the screen there is there's a huge golf course sitting right next to it. Who owns that golf course?
Well, the golf course is owned by as I understand it, by the private corporation that owns and operates Poplar Forest. But they have a problem of intrusion in several directions, but they've done a marvelous job of protecting what's left of the viewshed, and an absolutely first-rate job of restoring Poplar Forest to the way it would have been in Jefferson's day.
And it's only open, I believe, starting now till November or something like that.
They have a more limited schedule than we do at Monticello. We're open every day of the year except Christmas, but it's well worth the trip. It's an extraordinary home and an expression of his artistic and architectural ideals.
If you've just tuned in, we're at Monticello. We're talking about Thomas Jefferson, who, by the way, from 1790 to 1793 was Secretary of State under George Washington. From 1797 to 1801, he was the Vice President under John Adams. And from 1801 to 1809, he was the third President of the United States. Obviously, our next stop will be next week, and it will be very close to here, the James Madison home at Montpelier.
I think it's extraordinary to note, and most people aren't aware of this, that Jefferson was in public life for almost 40 years. Justice of the peace here in the county of Albemarle all the way to the presidency.
He was married for how long again?
10 years. You call it 10 years of uncheckered happiness.
How many children?
Had 6 by his wife Martha, 4 of whom died in infancy. Had only 2 children to reach maturity, and one of those died in her 20s.
One of the things we're doing at every program is finding a student and a school in the United States that has something to do with the president we're talking about. We're going to talk to that student in just a moment. Next, Highland, Indiana. Go ahead, please. Hello, Highland.
Yes, my name is George Van Til. I'm a county surveyor. I'm fascinated with this incredible man. I wanted to ask Mr. Jordan, I know that Thomas Jefferson was not only a surveyor but a county surveyor, and he was very involved in the system that is much of what we do is based on that still today. Can you tell us a little bit about his time before the presidency and before the other things he did when he was a surveyor, and then later when he helped to establish surveying as we know it today?
Thomas Jefferson was indeed a surveyor, as was his father, and a few years ago we had the National Professional Group of Surveyors come to Monticello to pay tribute to his memory. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about Jefferson. That's why he's so endlessly interesting to all of us, is he had so many sides. He's the American Leonardo. He's also the father of historical archaeology in America. He's the father of our coinage system. He's been called the founding father of food, the father of the American wine industry. In 1993, Runner's Magazine named him Fitness Man of the Year. So there's something in Thomas Jefferson for everybody.
Andrew Burstein, of all the people you've read in your life, the actual language that you've read, where would you put Thomas Jefferson's writing ability?
Near the top, if not the top. Jefferson was remarkable in his own age as a writer. This is why he was ultimately selected to draft the Declaration of Independence. There was a power and a passion to his words. The man himself was not outwardly passionate, but locked within him was this unusual power, and this was the way, typographical culture was more powerful than oratorical culture among the revolutionaries.
Did he ever write to a slave?
Yes, he did on occasion. Simple instruction. There are no great documents that you can find that would show Jefferson engaging in the kind of powerful rhetoric that we see in his public documents in conversing with the slave.
Dan Jordan?
Brian, I think it's perhaps more interesting that some of Jefferson's slaves wrote to him. And even though in time it was against the law to teach slaves to read and write, it's a matter of record that there was correspondence between Jefferson and his slaves. And he used slaves as overseers, and often the letters would involve work assignments.
I grew up attending Jefferson High School in Lafayette, Indiana, but no one ever told me who Jefferson was then, or I don't remember it ever being discussed, but we have on the phone a student that does know a lot more about the name of their high school. Sean Meacham, are you there?
I am.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
You're in what town in Washington?
I am in Federal Way, Washington.
Where is that?
South of Seattle.
How big is your high school?
It consists of about 4,000 students.
It's a big high school, and you're a sophomore, and you know something about Thomas Jefferson. When did you first know who he was and how it connected to your high school?
I've known a lot about him from my past year's experience, and this year I've started studying a little bit more about him.
What can you tell us about him?
Well, Thomas Jefferson had certain qualities expressed while being the President of the United States, and I'd have to say that he's a well-rounded man because he had so many interests, and he was a naturalist, an inventor, a philosopher, and he was one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence, and he had a common goal, and that goal was to develop a government that would assume freedom and well-being and prosperity for all people. And our school being named after him comes along with a vision of a respected man, a peaceful man, and a mentally strong man. So it's basically not just a name anymore.
Do your fellow students ever talk about the fact that your school's named after him?
That doesn't come up very often.
When did you first get interested? I mean, how did they pick you to come on the program this morning?
Well, Mr. Gochi wanted a sophomore representative to come out and talk about Thomas Jefferson, and he thought I'd do a good job at it. So.
What do you think of the subject of history, and do you study a lot of it?
Yeah, history is one of my favorite subjects, so I enjoy reading about world problems, figuring them out, and things like that.
What's the best thing about going to Thomas Jefferson High School?
We have a great academic program going on here at school, many opportunities for involvement, and the different programs, they're really great.
Tell us a little bit more about your teacher.
Mr. Gochi?
Yes.
Mr. Gochi was my history teacher, and I really enjoyed his class this year. I'm not in it anymore, but I really enjoyed it. He helps me. He helps everybody. He's a great teacher. He's willing to go out and basically do anything he needs to do to help everyone and to make sure that everybody has everything that they need, the education and the learning process, and I really enjoyed his class.
Thank you, Sean Meacham.
Sean, please tell our friend and your teacher, Joe Gochi, that you deserve an A+ for that presentation. And I might add that Monticello is pleased to have had over 600 teachers across the years to come here to summer programs, including 2 from Federal Way High School.
Yeah? Okay.
Jefferson High School and Federal Way.
Thank you, Sean Meacham, for joining us.
You're welcome.
And I want to make sure that our audience of teachers knows that they can also join C-SPAN in the classroom. We have a very active program, as they do here at Monticello. There's the number on the screen, 202-626-4858. Call right now, and folks will be able to enroll you in the C-SPAN in the classroom free of charge. You have also the website there where you can enroll, and you'll get material regarding our American Presidents series. Denver, Colorado, you're next. Go ahead, please.
First I want to say that I am a graduate of the University of Virginia, and I hope on the program you're going to talk a little bit about Jefferson and his relation with the university. My question is this. With the whole Sally Hemings and the conferment that he does have African-American descendants in the U.S., are there now going to be new interments in the Monticello Cemetery? What's the status of that? Have people requested it? I assume those requests will be granted, and when will that take place if it does? Thanks.
Thanks. Daniel Jordan.
It's not very well known, but the cemetery here is privately owned. It's owned by the Monticello Association, and that would be made up of descendants of the 2 daughters, Martha and Mary. So the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation, which operates Monticello, has nothing to do with the cemetery.
We will have a guest on later who will talk about the cemetery and about the descendants, and might be able to shed some light on the question there with Robert Gillespie.
Yeah.
Let's go to, I can't remember, did I just take Denver, Colorado? I need a new city, if I could, in the meantime, I'll ask Andrew Burstein. When you went to research Thomas Jefferson, where was your most valuable material?
The most valuable material was at the Library of Congress. This is where the great majority of his letters are stored. The Massachusetts Historical Society has some. University of Virginia Alderman Library has a special collection as well. These are all on microfilm, and a lot of libraries, college libraries around the country have them, so they're accessible.
If somebody wants to study Jefferson from afar, what can you help them with?
We're always happy to hear from people who have an interest in Thomas Jefferson, and our research center responds to about 1,200 queries a year, so they could just write to Monticello. In addition, our website has a lot of information.
How much of the microfilm material can they get from afar? Can they buy it, or do they have to come here?
Some of Jefferson's basic collections of writings are available on microfilm. In addition, there is a modern scholarly edition of his writings writings that covers through 1793, and Monticello is about to pick up 1809 to 1826 in that series.
Bluffton, South Carolina, you're next.
Hey, this is Mark Gaylor. I'm the executive chef at a restaurant in Savannah, Georgia. We had recently done a dinner down at the Cloister down near Brunswick, Georgia. Had to do with the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation. We had done some research and tried to recreate a dinner that...
Unfortunately, something is wrong with that line I noticed earlier. I'm really sorry. Did you get enough to know what he was
I got enough to know, and we have to remember that Jefferson was a practical gourmet, that he had become accustomed to French cuisine. He brought back a lot of menus and even a chef, but he also served good Virginia plantation food. A few years ago, we got a letter from the National Restaurant Association, or some professional organization of that effect, telling us that Thomas Jefferson had been elected to their Hall of Fame.
Andrew Burstein, if you were here in this room and there was just you and Thomas Jefferson, how hard do you think it would have been to talk to him?
He was a man who made people feel comfortable, feel at ease, so I don't think it would be at all difficult. The Virginian was bred on a kind of hospitality, was known for hospitality. Northerners and Southerners were different. Jefferson once described the Northerners as industrious, but somewhat hard to get along with, and the Southerners as somewhat lazy, indolent, he called them, but the most hospitable people.
Have any idea what his accent would have been like?
No, my students often ask that, and I suspect that it probably resembled British English, but there must have been some kind of Southern affectation. I know some linguists have looked at this, but there's no real definitive way of knowing.
When you teach him, when do you find your students lighting up for the first time saying, oh yeah, this is really interesting?
Well, one of the things that I focused on in my book that the students seem to like is the relationship between Jefferson and his wife. We have no letters from them because when Patty Jefferson died, Jefferson destroyed the letters, which was not uncommon at that time as a way of moving on with life. However, we know that she was important to him because he would write to other people in the 1770s and from the Congress in Philadelphia, for example, and he would say, if you want to know, just ask Patty. She has the information you need. But the students particularly liked the deathbed adieu when Patty Jefferson was dying here at Monticello. And together they composed a verse which was taken from Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy. And it's a very romantic verse about two lovers about to part. So when you read that, and it's on a 4-by-4-inch piece of paper, and it was in Jefferson's private drawer beside his bed until the day he died, when his daughter Martha found this crumpled up, folded countless times with a lock of Patty Jefferson's hair in it, and the tender moments that he expressed that showed him to have been a man of profound feeling humanizes him, and students respond to that.
What's the favorite thing, that's not a good word, that people, when they come to this house, always talk about?
I think most people are fascinated by the gadgets, and this is a gadgeteer's paradise. Not gadgets for the sake of gadgets, but gadgets for the sake of saving time or energy or space. But still, people are attracted to the unusual double doors or to the polygraph. You move one pin, you get an automatic copy as the other moves. And then I think people are also just inspired by the setting. We're on a mountaintop. The architecture is unique in its detail and its composites. We've had many people tell us that it's good for the soul to come to Monticello, and they leave somehow feeling a little better about themselves and their country.
Earlier we had a caller ask about the University of Virginia.
Yes.
Both of you went there. You got your PhDs there. We've got some video, obviously, which if you had to walk from here to the university, how long would it take you?
Well, we hear from the old grads, and they say that in their day they could walk up to Monticello and so forth, and it's still possible. We're looking at the dome room in the rotunda which was where the library would have been in Jefferson's vision of an academical village. And he had this notion of students and faculty living and learning together. It's an extraordinary assemblage. The American Institute of Architects voted it the most remarkable contribution to American architecture in the first 200 years of the Republic. There are lots of classical details. It's just a very revolutionary kind of institution in its day, and Jefferson was responsible for every single detail, from the architecture to the hiring of faculty to the curriculum to the emphasis on freedom of the students. I'd let Andy comment further, except that I always have found it fascinating that Jefferson called it the hobby of my old age.
Andrew Burstein, why do you think that Thomas Jefferson's image in American life is much bigger and a lot more people visit here than they do anything James Madison?
Madison was a quiet man. He was truly beloved. He had an unsuccessful presidency because he was not a man who was made to be the commander-in-chief of an army, and this was when America was trying to prove itself against Great Britain a second time in the War of 1812. Madison ended up fleeing from the president's house when the British came and burned Washington. So his presidency is unremarkable, or often considered in American history less remarkable than his achievements as the author of the Constitution.
Coming up in a few moments, Annette Gordon-Reed will be our guest. We'll talk about Sally Hemings and lots of other things. Jefferson, we go to Scottsburg, Indiana. You're next.
Yes, and good morning. I wanted to also compliment you, Mr. Lamb, on this program and the nature of your questions, which help so much in the learning and understanding. My question in particular was, at the introduction of the program, they spoke about the property had to be sold to satisfy his debts, and I was wondering who in particular bought the property and how was it preserved and what was done to maintain the property until the following years and for the last 100 years or so.
Thank you. Let me add to that. Why was he in debt in the first place, and how much debt, based on today's dollar, would it have been?
Well, Jefferson's debt accumulated over many years. He inherited some of it from his father, more of it from his father-in-law, and of course it was a difficult era to be a planner in the time of the American Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812 and the like. We estimate that he was about $100,000 in debt when he died, and I don't think anybody has a way of translating that to modern numbers, but it would be monumental.
Millions.
Millions. Now, in terms of what happens to Monticello after Jefferson's death, there's a brief interim owner, but the property passed in the 1830s. Jefferson died in 1826, so this is fairly soon, to a remarkable individual named Uriah Phillips Levy, who was the first Jew to be a flag officer in the U.S. Navy, and he's an important person. He was an early preservationist. He admired Jefferson and Jefferson's commitment to religious freedom. And the Levy family had it until 1923. When the foundation acquired it and maintains it to this day. So we salute the memory of the Levies. They were good stewards, otherwise we wouldn't be here this morning.
Real estate speculators would be interested to know that Monticello sold for $10,000.
And the books that he sold to the federal government, what did he get for that? How much money?
I think...
And what year did he sell them?
Yeah, he sold about 7,000 books from his library to the Library of Congress in his retirement in the 18-teens, maybe 1817 or thereabouts. And I believe the figure was something like $15,000. Do you know, Dan?
I think it was a little more than that, but it was at a loss. Jefferson needed the money, but he took a loss in order to reestablish the Library of Congress.
Last call for our two guests in this segment. We go to San Diego. You're next.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen. I was interested in finding out about Thomas Jefferson's work on the New Testament. I understand that he was a student of the New Testament and that he worked on a revision of the document. And I'm wondering if he was successful with the revision and if there have been any other presidents that have revised the New Testament.
He was a close student of religion and believed that the words of Christ had great importance. He thought the rest of it was a little hocus pocus. So he created his own Bible, and I think this is what the caller is talking about. He cut out the words of Christ from several translations, pasted them in a scrapbook, And that's what he read just before he went to sleep.
You know, fundamentally, Jefferson did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, but he thought him the most sublime moral teacher.
I have some background information that suggests that only 2 other former presidents did not belong to a church, Andrew Johnson and Abraham Lincoln.
Jefferson frequently attended church and different denominations. He was a man who contributed money to beggars on the street and to churches readily. So he prided himself in being the author of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, and wanted to recognize the diversity of American religious life.
We have just a couple seconds here left. The 2 of you, our first guests, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that today is the publishing date of Andrew Burstein's Sentimental Democracy. Those of you who want to read some more history about this country. What are your books, Mr. Jordan? You've got 3 of them, I know.
Well, thanks. Back when I was a college professor, I wrote 3 books, one on political leadership in Jefferson, Virginia, one on Richmond, and one on a tobacco company. But I've been busy doing other things the last 15 years.
What's the best thing about being director of Monticello?
I guess the best thing is the association with some remarkable people as colleagues and remarkable people as visitors, and of course the most remarkable person of all, Thomas Jefferson.
Andrew Burstein, when you teach, of all the people you talk about in American history, where does Thomas Jefferson land in the eyes of students?
Well, students are always very curious about Jefferson because he's a man whose words are still often invoked, and politicians on both sides like to identify with Jefferson's passionate language. So it's really hard to compare Jefferson, except perhaps to Lincoln. There's that melancholy strain in Lincoln's voice, and we also have photographs of Lincoln which make him an appealing person to look at. Jefferson is more of a man of mystery, I think, than Lincoln, but it's the emotional connection. It's Jefferson's words, Lincoln's words that students readily identify with.
Andrew Burstein, thanks for coming all the way from Iowa.
Thank you.
And Daniel Jordan for coming up the hill and letting us bring our bus here and the whole business of being in the park.
Thank you very much.
We're going to talk to 2 people who are involved in a project of oral history. Cinder Stanton and Diane Swan Wright, and they're on the grounds here of Monticello. Let me ask Cinder Stanton to explain to us, as the beginning of this little discussion, what is your project and how are you doing it?
Well, our project is called Getting Word, Monticello's African American Oral History Project, and we're extraordinarily lucky here at Monticello to have Jefferson's monumental archive, very rich in helping us to interpret Jefferson and Monticello. But when it comes to the African American community, it's rather unbalanced. It's from the perspective of a plantation manager. So in order to tell the full human dimension of the lives and contributions of the African American families here, we thought it might be a good idea to go out and locate descendants of those families. And so for the last 5 years, we've been talking to descendants of a number of families here who lived in bondage here at Monticello, taking us all over the country. I think now we have interviewed something like over 100 people in the last 5 years.
Diane Swan Wright, how do you go about interviewing them? Where do they come here or do you go there?
Well, both. Some people live in this area and are interested in having us interview them here. We've traveled over 22,000 miles over the past 5.5 years, and so we oftentimes go to people. And we really enjoy interviewing people in their homes and seeing their photographs and gathering their stories there.
What are you learning?
Oh, we're learning lots. We're learning that Monticello has a very special place in the lives of many African Americans.
Senator Stanton, what are you doing with the material?
Well, we tape our interviews, then they're transcribed, and we have them in our files. But we try to make sure that the information that we gain is immediately translated into interpretation here at Monticello, particularly in our outdoor tour, the Plantation Community Tour. And I think what we've learned has contributed a great deal to the visitors' experience in hearing that tour. Some of the themes that come out of our interviews tell us about the continuous struggle against odds to forge strong bonds of family and community and develop a rich culture, all of that was going on unrecorded here at Monticello. And we're able to tell individual stories as well about members of certain families.
You can see on the screen that there's going to be a chat room coming up at noon East Coast time. For those of you who want to talk to Senator Stanton, you can join us at AmericanPresidents.org, our website, and she will answer questions beyond what we're able to do right here. Diane Swan-Wright, can you give us one story that you can remember of somebody you've talked to in this that got your attention?
Well, I think one of the good things about doing this work is that we're able to oftentimes bring people together with the documents. And several years ago, Senator and I were doing a presentation in Washington, D.C., and we met a woman who had just a name of an ancestor and the fact that he had come from this area. And what we were able to do through courthouse research and looking at the records that we have here at Monticello is to really connect that woman with an ancestor that she didn't know she had. And not only with an ancestor's name, but with information about this man. And so, in a way, we're helping people complete their own family histories, and that certainly is very gratifying and something that we enjoy doing.
Before we lose the two of you from the program, tell us just a little bit about yourself. Diane Swan-Wright, how did you get involved in all this in the first place?
I've been a historian for a while, and was born, grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, worked at the Banneker Douglas Museum in Annapolis, and met Senator while I was doing coursework at the University of Virginia. And she pledged me to come on to work with this project.
Senator Stanton, I've got to first ask you, where did you get the name Cinder?
I've been stuck with it ever since infancy. My real name's Lucia, and my mom wanted to call me Lucinda. She began calling me Cinda, became Cinder, and now I have two identities.
How did you get in this?
Well, I've been at Monticello a long, long time, probably longer than anybody else up here. I first came in the late 1960s and ran away a couple of times, but I've been working here over 20 years of the last 30.
Thank you both. We look forward, Senator Stanton, to joining you on the chat room it's about an hour and 15 minutes.
Great.
Here in our parlor headquarters is Annette Gordon-Reed, a recent Book Notes guest, and a person who has written the book Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy. You've been on the network so much, and we've talked so much about this in the last couple of weeks. I want to just ask you to bring us up to date on where you think this issue is now.
Well, right now we're sort of in a reassessment period or an assessment period. People are still very, very much interested in it. I get letters from people. I think it's sort of somewhat died down a little bit since the initial sort of fury and interest in November. But right now I think it's a time for people to sit back and think about where do we go from here.
We're going to take phone calls for you in just a moment, but tell us your basic findings based on your book and what's happened since then as of today.
Well, basically, my book was about the historiography of the Jefferson-Hemings controversy, and what I found from looking at the material that there was much more evidence to support the existence of the Jefferson-Hemings relationship than had been given credit to by historians. And since the DNA test came out in November, the results were announced in November, it pretty much tracked what I found in my book. And it was, for me, the final piece of the puzzle that made me believe that this story was true.
I remember in our interview when I asked you what you thought of Thomas Jefferson, you said something to the effect you liked him.
Well, I had a discussion with someone about this last night about why. I do like him. I find him an interesting person with flaws, as all human beings have. But in the main, someone who was a lively mind, someone who contributed a lot to America, and it's just sort of endlessly fascinating. So if that's liking, I guess that's what I mean when I say that.
I don't know whether you've seen it. There's an ad about you in the Washington Post today.
No, I have not.
Seen it? Your picture's in there?
No, I didn't know that. You let me use the newspaper, but I didn't get that far.
Well,
no.
But what I thought was interesting in there was that you're going to be in the Washington area on April the 16th, I think.
Yes, yes.
But what it said is almost like straight from the Oprah show, Annette Gordon-Reed. Why do you think they made such a big deal about that?
Well, because Oprah is a phenomenon, and if you're on Oprah, everybody knows you. People come up to me from that show and say, you were on Oprah. It's just astonishing. So I guess it's a way of making a point of connection, so it's sort of validating me for the public.
What do you do full-time?
I'm a law professor at New York Law School. I teach property and basic courses and a course in slavery and the law.
Conroe, Texas is your home, and your two children are how old?
9 and 6.
Let's go to the phones. Great Falls, Virginia. Welcome to Monticello.
Thank you. This is Jennifer Sands. I'm a 1984 graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University, and I was privileged to take several history courses, Virginia and American, with Dr. Jordan. And VCU is very sad to lose him. I know he was the most gifted and enlightened professor we ever had. But now I'm married and have 3 children, 9, 8, and 5, and I would love to get Dr. Jordan's recommendations on books on Jefferson for children, either those that he read as a boy or those that have come out recently that capture the man and historically correct and exciting for children.
Thanks. Dr. Jordan is no longer with us, but I can transfer that question to Annette Gordon-Reed. From your experience, what are the better books?
Certainly Duma Malone's 6-volume biography of Jefferson, Jefferson and His Time, The Jefferson Image in the American Mind by Merrill Peterson. One of my personal favorites is a book by a man named Jack McLaughlin, Jefferson and Monticello, and it's about the building of Monticello. And he sort of blends in talk about slavery, but also about the other aspects of Jefferson's life. But certainly anything by Malone and Peterson would be wonderful places to start in writing about Jefferson or reading about Jefferson.
San Francisco, you're on with Annette Gordon-Reed. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm curious about actually about the ongoing restoration at Monticello. I visited there many years ago and many times since. I think that's probably what inspired me to become a historian and an antiquarian. And I noticed in your shot right now, they're painting the little wooden appendices at the end of the study, and I was so glad to see that these have been restored. I'm also curious to know whether I had understood years ago that the floor in the entrance hall at Monticello had once been painted a grass green, and I'm wondering if there's any likelihood of repainting it that color.
Thanks for the call. I'm not sure that Annette Gordon-Reed's an expert on the restoration here. Have you
It's
talked
still
much
pretty
about
green now, as I look at it. No, I'm taking it that that's the color that it always was, and it is a green. It's not exactly grass green, but it is green.
What's the most time you've spent here looking at the grounds, and what did you learn about the slave quarters when you did see them?
Oh, I've spent the entire, I've been here numerous times, but the longest time in any one session would be one day. I spent a day walking around, finding about where people lived, the kinds of jobs they had, and noting that most of the people who were up here on the mountain were members of the Hemmings family. Just the proximity to Monticello, even though the people who were on Mulberry Row, as opposed to the people who were mainly the field people who worked in the fields, who were further down the mountain. You notice the sort of separation between, it's a plantation, but it doesn't have the real look of a working plantation because most of the slaves lived further away from the house.
What's the issue about whether the Hemmings descendants ought to be buried here in the burial area?
Mm-hmm. Well, the issue is if people believe that the Hemmings descendants are descendants of Thomas Jefferson, should they be allowed to be buried in the Monticello Cemetery, which is where Jefferson is buried, Jefferson and his wife. And if I understand it, there are a couple of deeds to sections of the property, and there's some question about whether or not it means the legitimate descendants. I'm sure there are some people who don't believe that still believe that they are descendants of Jefferson. So I don't get very much mixed up in the family controversy. All I know is what I read in the papers, but I assume that it's about the legitimacy of allowing the Hemmingses to be buried there, to the extent that they want to.
How many children did Sally Hemings have?
Sally Hemings had 7 children, 4 of whom we believe lived to adulthood.
On the screen is the actual gravestone for Thomas Jefferson. We have a call from Mount Vernon, Virginia, where George Washington used to live. Go ahead, please.
Annette Gordon-Reed, Prosecutor Reed, your research in your book fails to mention anything about Jefferson's brother, his sons, George Jefferson Jr., John Garland Jefferson. You criticize other historians for not including the black oral history, and you ignore the black oral history of Isaac Jefferson, who talks about Randolph Jefferson playing the fiddle and dancing half the night with the slaves. You, even on page 136, compare Jefferson with Hitler. How can you consider yourself a reasonable historian with this type of lack of proper research?
Well, I disagree with you. I think it was very proper research. I didn't mention the other people because there's nothing in the historical record that indicates that they were connected to Sally Hemings. If you go through the sort of play history as possibilities, you would never finish a book. This is possible, this is possible. I mean, there are people who said it's possible that Alexander Hamilton was the son of George Washington, but there's no indication that that's true. So unless, if there had been something that indicated to me that these people were likely fathers of Sally Hemings, of course I would have raised it. But I don't think that dancing with slaves at Monticello means that you are the father of a specific woman's children. That's, I have to have some more of a connection besides that. What is the comparison to Hitler that you're referring to?
I don't think he's still there. Let's go to New Haven, Connecticut next. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Professor Gordon Reed, for taking my question, my inquiry. I have three. First of all, relative to your book, which I have not read yet, but I'm going to purchase it today.
Thank you.
I would like to know, why is it they refer to the relationship with Sally Hemings and Jefferson as being an affair? What I understand, slaves did not have affairs with slave masters. They were raped. And I don't think Jefferson is a great man at all. And I base that on the fact that, you know, when I was younger, my mother trotted us around to all of these historical places. And I visited Monticello when I was approximately 9 years old. I'm in my 50s now. And I had a very chilling effect when I visited there. And I've learned as I've grown older that Monticello wasn't built by Jefferson. The slaves built that place, artisans, indentured servants. Jefferson did nothing there. A man is not great. And also another thing, I learned from C-SPAN that there were men, white privileged men, presidents who did not own slaves in Jefferson's time, one being John Adams. So Jefferson, to me, was a horrible person. And I wish that these new interpretive historians would you put the taboos on the table and tell things as they are. But please.
Thanks, caller. Thanks. Was Jefferson a horrible person in your mind?
I don't think Jefferson was a horrible person in my mind. I think he was a flawed person. As she mentioned, there were people who were not slave owners at the time. John Adams was a New Englander. Slavery was not endemic to the culture of New England. It was a part of the culture of New England, but Jefferson was born a slaveholder and did not have the inclination, and you could say strength or whatever, to walk away from the system. He knew the system was wrong. He wrote some of the most stinging indictments of the institution of slavery. But I understand her perspective. I mean, I have mixed feelings when I come to Monticello. I know I can marvel at the architecture. I understand the greatness of the words that Jefferson wrote, and I understand how blacks have used those words to sort of leverage their place in American society. But you can't forget that it was a plantation, and I think the caller's sentiments are completely understandable. We have a different view. We come to a different conclusion about it, but there's no way to, I think, to whitewash or to minimize the importance of slavery as a part of Jefferson's life. He understood it as a moral dilemma, and he understood it as a moral failure. So it is somewhat interesting to me that people today would suggest that it's something that we should not talk about when it was something that concerned him very much.
Flora, Illinois, you're next.
Hello, Brian.
Hi.
This is Bill Etchison, and Jefferson is one of my favorite people, and I have a lot of information about him, but one book that I have is True Stories of Great Americans, Thomas Jefferson, by Edward S. Ellis, AM 1898. And the one that I would like to mention is, I guess he had trouble with the editors in the newspapers too, because if I may read this, it's not too long here. Perhaps an editor might begin a reformation in some way such as this: divide his paper into 4 chapters, heading the first truths, the second probabilities, and the third possibilities, and the fourth would be lies. The first chapter would be very short, as it would contain little more than the authentic papers and information from such sources as the editor would be willing to risk his own reputation for their truth. The second would contain what, from a mature consideration of all circumstances, he would conclude to be probably true. This, however, should rather contain too little than too much. And the third and the fourth should be professedly for those readers who would rather have lies for their money than the blank paper they would occupy.
Annette Gordon-Reed, any response?
Well, he certainly had his problems with newspaper editors at the time. As a political figure, he was quite controversial. I mean, we think of Jefferson today as someone who had sort of universal acclaim, but from the very beginning of his career, he was a person that lots of people did not like and didn't mind saying it, unlike Washington, where if something went wrong, it was pretty much Hamilton's fault. People didn't have a problem at all in being very vitriolic towards Jefferson. So he certainly, if anybody, had the occasion to ponder the ways of newspaper editors and have comments about them.
We are here on an April 2nd morning, which started out to be quite foggy, 1999, at Monticello, which is about 125, 130 miles south of Washington, D.C. On the screen is a live picture of the residence up on top of the hill looking down over Charlottesville, Virginia. Annette Gordon-Reed from New York City is here in the parlor. Our cameras are about the grounds and also here. We will continue to take your calls on the subject of Thomas Jefferson. Our next stop will be James Madison, which will be a week from today on a Friday at Montpelier, which is not more than 25 minutes from here. And then it's James Monroe from his law offices in Fredericksburg on the Monday after the next Friday. Let's go to Palmdale, California. Go ahead, please. You're on with Annette Gordon-Reed.
Good morning. It's good to be on C-SPAN. I've been trying to get in all morning, and I wanted to talk to the historians. And my question was, when they referred to Thomas Jefferson, when anything came up about Sally, they didn't acknowledge her or her children, and they kind of got around the question, and they weren't direct. So I'm just grateful to see Annette there today. The first time I seen her, she was on C-SPAN, and myself and my 13-year-old son, we have become interested in this because of the research she has done. We are going to go out and get the book, and I'm just glad to see you. I'm not angry like the caller before, but I'm just grateful that truth is coming forth now. Thank you for taking my call.
Why do, let me rephrase it, how often do people seem to be angry with you or angry with the issue of Sally Hemings? And is it possible that this man could have had this relationship and still be a great man?
Well, that's a lot of questions.
We got some time.
We have some time. Anger at me, not a lot. I mean, I have to say, over the past 2 or 3 years, I've gotten letters from people who, disagree with me, but in the main have been quite respectful. It's only really after the DNA that seemed, that pretty much confirmed what I had said, that I've gotten some hostility. On the question of could Jefferson have been involved in a relationship like this and be a great man, I would say yes. I think that the principal problem, as I've said before, with Jefferson, the difficulty is on the issue of slavery. As a person who knew that slavery was wrong, wrote about the wrongness of slavery, but could not bring himself to extricate himself from the system. That, to me, would be a greater failure, is a greater failing than the fact that he may have become infatuated with a woman on his plantation. That is, people could see that as flawed, but that's a human flaw that I could understand. Buying and selling people is another matter altogether. It's quite interesting to me that people seem more upset about the Sally story than about his involvement in buying and selling people. One, you could understand. The other just seems unfathomable. But it was a way of life, and he was born into that way of life, and we can't ignore that. But it's not something that I think disqualifies him as a person who should be an American hero, because he did contribute to America.
Do you know of any white men back in those days who were born into families that had slaves, who freed them before they had to under the law?
Well, yes, there were. The Pleasants, Robert Pleasants was a man who freed slaves. Jefferson's teacher, George Wythe, at one point had slaves, not as many as Jefferson, but who freed them. Most of the famous people that we know who manumitted slaves, you think of George Washington, who manumitted his slaves upon the death of his wife, actually. He made arrangements to do that then. So there were people who freed slaves, but it was not a common thing to do.
Tampa, Florida, you're next with Annette Gordon-Reed. Go ahead, please.
Good morning to all panelists this morning. My name is Hewitt Smith, and I'm calling from Tampa, Florida. Ms. Reed, I'm curious to hear a discussion in regards to the fact that Mr. Jefferson was of adult age and Sally Hemings was a child. And the fact of having sexual relations with a child is something that we would consider to be a taboo or would be illegal in many states even today. And why that fact is never brought up. And interesting to you to bring up the fact that the buying and selling of human beings and the fact that Jefferson did not free his slaves and had a dilemma in regards to his slaves might also trail back to the idea of the sexual relationship, the freedom that the white men had at the time with the black slave women, and the discussion should involve some of that, not so much of that he fathered these children, but how do we feel or what we should feel even today in regards to the sexual freedom with which they had with the black slave females. And most of all, the fact that she was a child.
Thank you.
Well, that's an issue. I did a talk at my daughter's school about this to sixth graders, and I was trying to be very, very circumspect in what I said. And of course, you know, sixth graders being what they are today, I mean, they sort of raced ahead of me into areas that I hadn't intended to go. And I was trying to explain to them what the problem was: the miscegenation, the slavery, the exploitation of women, those kinds of issues, and none of it really registered with them. The one thing that registered with them was her age, because she would have been 15 or 16 years old. I mean, when she went to France at age 14, and she was there for 2.5 years. So nobody knows when this would have started. But she would have been 16 years old, which is, from our lights, a child. In the 18th century, that would have been young for women to be married or to be having sexual relations. But Jefferson's daughter was married at 17. John Marshall, the Chief Justice, proposed to and married his wife. She was 14 when he proposed to her, and I believe they were married when she was about 15. So it sounds harsh to us, and it could still be harsh to us, but it was not uncommon for teenage girls to be involved in sexual relations at that time.
What is the racial mix in your child's school?
Well, not as diverse as I would like to be. She, out of a class of 50, I believe there are 5 black children in her particular class.
Did you notice any difference in the kids, what they would ask you based on their race?
Oh, no, actually, excuse me. I mean, my daughter's not in the 6th grade. Another one, it was pretty much the same ratio. No, there was no difference in the kinds of questions. They were mainly trying to sort out, well, how is this an affair if he wasn't married? You know, she wasn't married, what's the problem? The racial, you know, the difference on the races didn't really register with them. They were mainly asking about the age was the thing that seemed to get to them. But the questions were very, very good, but they were all pretty much the same between black and white.
Salem, Oregon, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. It's Dick Geddes here in Salem, Oregon. First of all, I want to thank you very much for this great series you have. Thanks, C-SPAN. You just mentioned a couple of authors, Malone and Peterson. I have a book by Fawn Brodie, written back in the 70s, An Intimate History of Thomas Jefferson. And I want to know how authentic that is.
Well, actually, I should have mentioned Fawn Brodie's biography of Jefferson, because I think that it is quite underrated, given, you know, the turn of events over the past year. She was the first historian to write of the Hemings story as if it were true, and it caused a firestorm of controversy. I think there are points where she sort of goes off into sort of Freudian psychology that's a little bit off the mark. But just in general, I think in terms of pointing out some things about his character, about life at Monticello, I think it's a good biography.
Have you thought about doing any other research or any other books on any other white male leaders in those days that might have had relationships with black slaves?
No. No.
You said that quickly.
No. I mean, it isn't. I mean, Jefferson and Monticello and slavery at Monticello has always been a particular interest to me. I'm not really, I mean, interested in, sort of establishing a genre of slave owners, famous founding fathers and their children. It's primarily Jefferson and Monticello that has interested me. So no, I have no interest in that.
Fort Dodge, Iowa, on with Annette Gordon-Reed. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm calling just to respond, first of all, to a comment made by a viewer a little earlier. Personally, I want to thank C-SPAN for doing this series on the presidents. It's just great. And the first three presidents so far are the ones that I hold in greatest high respect. If it hadn't been for them, we probably wouldn't be here today. But a caller earlier had said that Thomas Jefferson wasn't a great man for a whole list of reasons she issued. And the man that wrote the Declaration of Independence and was just at a high level with George Washington in writing these great documents and his work with the University of Virginia, I don't know how you can say he wasn't a great man. His issues with Sally Hemings are not entirely discovered yet on how, if this issue is true. It's in great conflict amongst historians. And DNA evidence is not a 100% thing yet. It's not accepted in many courts in our country. And I don't think we should explore that issue. It's very much in prevalence with the issue with our current president. But I think that we should keep in mind that this man was a great man, a great writer, and a great thinker, and we need to make sure that we remember leaders like that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I agree with the caller to an extent. I think that Jefferson was a great man. I don't think that the construction of the Hemings story makes him not a great man. To say, I mean, and this is sort of a theme that runs throughout a lot of the callers or that I've read, that somehow by talking about this or by even accepting it as truth, that somehow Jefferson ceases to be great. And it's not an either-or proposition. If it's true, then he wasn't a great man. If it's not true, then, then we have to defend against this at all costs. I don't think, as I said before, it's the issue of, to the extent that anyone wants to criticize, it's the issue of slavery itself. Jefferson as a slave owner, that's the problem, not this specific thing, at least to me.
We're going to learn more about the Descendants organization, the descendants of Thomas Jefferson, in a moment. First, Los Angeles. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi. My name is Carl McGill from Los Angeles, and I found through research that my family came from the Hewitt plantation in Southern Virginia. How will this situation in Monticello affect the whole plantation issue with research? And is it possible that one of the issues dealing with slave children is that some passed for white? Was there an inheritance issue at hand for land? Also, to add to another caller, that I think that Jefferson Davis and Robert Lee freed their slaves. So, your answer, please, on those issues, if I was clear?
Thanks.
Yeah. In terms of affecting other people's research into slavery, I think this, to my mind, is not a great revelation about slavery. We knew that slave owners had relations with slave women, but I think that this is a great vehicle for people talking about things. I have no doubt that it's going to spark a lot of interest in other plantations, and not just in terms of sex, but in terms of the social life of slavery. We know it's not just a system about people working and not getting paid, or it's a social life. How did people live? What did they do? And I have no doubt that this is going to spark a lot of interest in that. It's not sort of a takeoff from this one narrow thing to thinking about slavery as a whole. At least maybe it's wishful thinking on my part. That's what I hope happens.
How far have you gone back in your own life to find out where your folks came from originally?
It's strange. I know more about the Hemingses and the Randolphs than I know about my own family. I've been talking to my father recently about that. I can go back a few greats, but all of my family is pretty much from East Texas. So once I actually get going on that, I think the record should go back, to slavery at least. I'll be able to find it. But we're pretty much Texans back into the 1840s, and I got to get to that and find out what's going on.
But you don't have any idea what country you might have come from originally, or whether...
in Africa?
Yeah.
No. There are people in our family. Most blacks have some white ancestry, and we know where those people are. But but African people, we do not know. We do not know.
Robert Gillespie is on the lawn here, and he heads up a Descendants group. Tell us about it, Mr. Gillespie.
Well, I'm currently president of the Monticello Association. We have about 700 dues-paying members who are descended from Jefferson's daughters, Martha and Mariah. There are probably 2,000 to 3,000 descendants of those two daughters, so our organization does not represent the entire group. But we do operate and maintain the graveyard here at Monticello. It's about 2/3 of an acre down the hill from where I'm standing.
How many people are buried there?
I think somebody gave me a count of 187. We may have had a burial since then.
Who's the most recent, do you know?
I do not.
And how recent would it be?
I think earlier this winter, in fact, I do remember some events about it. I believe it was a woman who died in California and her ashes were brought here to Monticello. There was some story behind that. She had apparently been estranged from her sister for many years, and they are reunited in death. I think both of them are now buried here at Monticello.
Can you be buried there?
Yes, I can.
Do you intend to do so?
I haven't made that decision yet.
And why?
I hope I have a few more years to live, but I am eligible to be buried here.
So if you're buried there, does it cost you anything?
No, it does not.
How do you determine whether or not you're a descendant of Thomas Jefferson? How can you find that out for sure?
So far, Brian, we have been using a genealogy that we have put together in our collected papers, which is based upon the birth certificates and written records of the daughters and sons of Martha Jefferson Randolph and the children of Mariah Epps.
And what does it mean to walk around saying, I'm a Jefferson descendant?
Well, I don't like to brag about that. I don't think he would appreciate that. But it does give me a certain pride being here on the mountain. I'm proud of the Declaration of Independence and the 4th of July. I'm also proud of Jefferson's separation of church and state and his ideas that got built into our First Amendment in the Bill of Rights.
Now, when is the decision going to be made on the Hemmings family in the graveyard?
It's still to be made. We have a number of concerns that we're looking at. One of them, I alluded to the fact that we have been proceeding on a written genealogy as to who is currently considered a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. Another legal aspect that concerns us is the half acre of land that we acquired in 1923 has a condition placed upon it that it's for burial of descendants of Thomas Jefferson only. In 1923, we did not have any DNA evidence, and at that time, I don't think that the offspring from an out-of-wedlock affair would have been considered descendants. And we're researching the legal aspects of that.
So when will the decision be made?
Gosh, who knows, perhaps in a year. I think at our annual meeting in May, we will probably debate the issues. Another thing that concerns us is so far the only DNA evidence that's available is for Eston Hemmings. It indicates that he does have a Y chromosome that is indicative of the male Jeffersons. Historians have indicated that perhaps Thomas Jefferson had better access to Sally at the time that she was conceiving children. But Sally had other children that we're concerned about, Harriet, Beverly, and Madison. And it's possible that in the future DNA testing will become more explicit or will give us ability to check something out and confirm evidence on the other three children.
What would it mean to you if the Hemmings group were allowed to be buried there in the cemetery, and what would you think of Thomas Jefferson if it were absolutely confirmed and everybody agreed that he did have children by Sally Hemmings?
Well, I think in a sense I agree with what I heard Annette saying earlier. Once you come to grips with the fact that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, it's not really a problem to think that he may have fallen in love with one of them. Now, he was widowed in 1782, so he was a relatively young widower. Also, Sally was his sister-in-law. She was the daughter of John Wales, just as his wife, Martha, was. So, at the very minimum, we know that the Hemmings family, or the descendants from Sally Hemmings, if they were not Jefferson's children, they were his nieces and nephews.
A couple more questions and we'll let you go. Do you carry a card that says you're a member of the descendants group?
No, I do not. I do have a couple of books I could refer you to, but I'm not a card carrying. I am a fifth great grandson.
Does it cost you any money to belong?
Yes, we have dues that have to pay every year, and that may be why we only have 700 members in the association instead of the full 2,000 or 3,000.
What's it cost?
I think it's only about $10 per year for a regular adult member.
And if I had to walk from where I'm sitting up on top of the hill or either walk from where you are out in front of the house to the grave, how far is that away?
I believe it's about a quarter of a mile down the hill.
And who pays for that? And how much does it cost a year to actually maintain the grave sites?
It's not that expensive. Our dues do some of the maintenance. Our big expense right now is the iron fence that surrounds the graveyard, and we're in the process of reconditioning it. We have an endowment from members who have contributed over the years. That the interest on that is partially enough to cover the operating expenses. Also, the foundation helps out. I believe they go in and take care of clipping the grass and raking the leaves every year.
Is there anything unique about the Jefferson obelisk itself and what's on it?
I like what's inscribed on it, that he didn't put on there that he was the third president of the United States. And apparently the three things we were proudest of was that he was author of the Declaration of Independence, author of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, and founder of the University of Virginia.
Robert Gillespie, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Asheville, North Carolina. You're next for Annette Gordon-Reed. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I commend C-SPAN, an oasis in the vast desert of television. Two comments. One, I would suggest you might want to consider adding to Jefferson's biography the period 76 to 79, when he rewrote some 120 laws for the state of Virginia, including the statute for religious freedom. Second comment, I wonder for Dr. Reed if there is any validity to the idea that the DNA should have considered Jefferson's brother and his sons as possible fathers. It seems quite unusual that Jefferson would come home in 1808 to father a child when he was 65, suffering from migraine headaches, and in the midst of a terrible embargo policy, and should still become a father. Thank you.
I think the DNA, by its nature, considers any Jefferson male relative who was alive at that time and who would have been in the vicinity of Monticello, because it is the Y chromosome that identifies families. As I said to the caller before, the difficulty with that, it's not scientifically impossible, but the difficulty is that there's no historical indication that these people are connected to Sally. I mean, the problem that I have is that we're not speaking in a vacuum. We have a memoir from a man who was enslaved at Monticello, Madison Hemmings, who gave his family history. And I think that given the strength of that statement, the circumstantial evidence, the other direct evidence, and comments from other people at that time, it certainly makes it plain that Jefferson, to my mind, is certainly the more probable candidate. And that's what history is. It's about probabilities. I mean, if you're not at a place, you could never know with 100% certainty of what is true. You have to go on the record that's before you. And the totality of the record suggests that it was Jefferson. Now, if people come up with some direct statements and some indications of who these people were, their possible connection to Sally, then it's something worth considering. But sort of playing the game of it's possible is a way really of negating the Hemmings family legacy. And that's why I wrote the book. There was not enough attention given to the views of the Hemmings family, and that it could have been Jefferson's brother plays right into that, because it doesn't consider that we have very firm evidence on the other side.
Annette Gordon-Reed's book is Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy. It's available in paperback, and I think in some places the hardback is still there. Mm-hmm. Our co-chairs of our series on American presidents, Mark Farkas and Marty Dominguez. Mark on the programming side, Marty on the administrative side. Mark here for this particular stop, along with Jill Leger from that department. And also Brett Betzel is our director in our school bus, which is located here. Don't forget, teachers, those of you home and want to get active in C-SPAN in the classroom, you can call us at 202-626-4858, 202-626-4858, and you'll find someone there today enroll you in C-SPAN in the classroom. The number's there on the screen, and also if you want to just do it through the website, it's cspan.org/classroom. San Diego for Annette Gordon-Reed. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. Good morning. I just would like to, I have a couple comments and one question. First comment is that a lot of people in America always call, well, quote-unquote, African Americans. I feel that all slaves, because I am from the Cape Verdean Islands, which is on the west coast of Africa, did not all come from Africa. So all black people in America are not from Africa. But anyway, I just wanted to say that to the callers that called and would like kind of get upset about Jefferson being in an interracial relationship with one of his slaves shouldn't be such a big deal. I mean, because it's been going on, and I mean, it's almost the new century, and I mean, people should just, you know, get over it. You know, it's something that happened. He was a great man, yada yada yada. Not to make it so lightly, but you know, he was a great man, and a lot of people were great. But I just think they should, you know, not take it out of context. It was what it was, and you know, learn about our real history. You know, excuse me, instead of like, you know, just taking it as his story, make it real. You know, everybody wants to search for truth. So, and I appreciate what Annette did, and you know, checked on things, and you know, and it came out. And I just think people should just, you know, wake up. You know, because it's just this is America. It's the big melting pot. Not everybody's pure, and the people that are fearful, whether they be black or white, shouldn't be scared, because everybody got different nationalities in it. And he was a great man. He had slaves. That's what happened, and we'll just all have to get over it and go to the future and stop worrying about all this nonsense.
Thanks.
Well, I mean, I agree with the sentiment. But you do have to understand the response to this story really is sort of colored by the way it came about. It came about as a political scandal. And I was thinking about this some months ago, about what it must have been like writing biographies of Jefferson in the 20th century when it was against the law for black people and white people to marry in Virginia. I mean, this didn't end until 1966 in Loving v. versus Virginia. So in a sense, this notion that you're accusing Jefferson of a crime, and it was a crime, would, according to the law, would, I think, weigh heavily with people. And it's sort of hard for people to get beyond that. But as she said, you know, we're almost in a new millennium, and it's a possible way now to sit back and look at, reassess and see what this really means, as opposed to what people told us it meant back in the days when this was considered, you know, criminal activity.
If you've just tuned in, we're at the third of 41 stops as we cover American presidents throughout the rest of the year. We're sitting in the parlor here at Monticello, which is located right outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. We'll be here for just a short time and taking your calls for Annette Gordon-Reed. And we go next to Leavenworth, Kansas. Go ahead, please.
Yes. This last fall, when the controversial magazine article came out, my husband had been in contact with the Jefferson family genealogical expert. He notified my husband right before the article came out, that the article was going to be coming out, and that he was very upset the fact that the writers of the article had contacted him to find the descendants of Jefferson, but when he told him of the intricate relationships of Jefferson and Jefferson's brother and his son, I believe his name is Randolph, the magazine article writers ignored that and didn't bring it up and didn't mention it as a possibility. And this man is, and I wish I knew his name, says that the Y chromosome could very possibly come through Jefferson's brother and his son, Randolph, who spent time at Monticello, and who was an age that would have been much more attractive to Sally than a 65-year-old man who was not in the greatest shape. I'll get off and hear your response.
Well, I would make the same response that I made before. It's scientifically possible, but for historians, you need something besides just the scientific possibility. There has to be some link, other than the fact that you really be Jefferson's brother Randolph, the fact that he was alive and that he danced with black people at Monticello as making him the father of a woman's children. We have very specific information about Jefferson. We had one of his dearest friends wrote about this in his private diary. When somebody has the sort of wealth of information about Randolph or about George or about Isham, these are the other people that have been mentioned, then there's something to talk about. But this is really, I think the people who are doing this are really don't really think that they have the evidence. It's really to keep people from coming to closure on the matter. And if you have somebody lurking out there in the shadows who's a possible father, then you can say, well, we'll never know. But this doesn't do justice, I believe, to the Hemmings family, and who have sort of cleared every hurdle that's been put in front of them to keep saying, well, what about this person? Until we go through every genealogy of every Jefferson who ever lived. It's just, it isn't reasonable.
Dan Jordan told us, the man who runs this place, that 550,000 people come here every year, or at least in the last year. Do you have friends, African-American friends, who come here, or, I mean, you can see the pictures today of the visitors, and there aren't, I don't know that I've seen any African-Americans out there. Have any of your friends come, and do you?
None of my friends have come, and they sort of look askance when I think of that. Well, they know that I'm working in this area, so they understand why I come. I've been here a number of times, and there have been blacks. But you're right, they're not, it's not a, it isn't something that I think people apparently don't feel excited about coming to. You would have mixed feelings about coming to a plantation. It's a hard thing. I mean, my view has been that, or is that it's like visiting a sick relative in the hospital. You know, people who you know you have to go see them, and you know they're counting on your seeing them, and it's important to them. I feel that wherever black people were in slavery, black people should go and know what the place was like, to try. People at Monticello have been very receptive to comments about the presentation of the lives of slaves here, and I think it's a duty for people to come.
Busy day, tourists here today, and the camera there looking through the door where we are from the entrance hall outside, where you come in from the east if you come visiting here. A number of background notes about Thomas Jefferson. He was 6'2.5". During his administration, the population of the United States was 5.5 million. He was born in Virginia, one of 8 presidents born in the state, including Zachary Taylor and many others. He was one of 3 who attended the College of William and Mary, along with John Tyler and James Monroe. He was 57 when he took office, the same age as George Washington, James Madison, and John Quincy Adams. By the way, the John Quincy Adams program will be done on a Sunday at 9:00 a.m. In the morning from the Massachusetts Historical Association. He was one of 24 lawyers who were presidents. He was one of 6 presidents to have served as Secretary of State, along with the others, John Quincy Adams, James Buchanan, James Madison, James Monroe, and Martin Van Buren. He was one of 4 presidents defeated before becoming president, along with William Henry Harrison, Andrew Jackson, and Richard Nixon, who all ran for president before they won. And he was the first president elected by the House of Representatives. Battle Creek, Michigan, for Annette Gordon-Reed. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN.
Welcome.
I was listening to this president's series that you've had on, and I want to thank you for having Dr. Reed on. She is so knowledgeable on everything to do with Jefferson, and she spoke about the 16-year-old age of this woman that had the child, supposedly, of Jefferson. And I wanted to say that as far as I could decipher in studying our genealogy and other people in that era, that 16 was an average age to be married. You were considered an old maid if you weren't married by then, and nobody wanted you. And my ancestors, my great-grandmother and great-great and on through, well, they were all married about that age, some at 14. And the slavery in that time, they couldn't marry their slaves, and it was illegal if they did try to. And if he did fall in love with a slave, where there were many beautiful of white people, black people, and there was no reason that he shouldn't fall in love with one, that it being he couldn't marry her, I don't think it was a crime. This type of thing, and a lot of slave owners just thought, there was nothing to this. But as you said, he even had nieces and nephews, because evidently his father-in-law did the same type of thing. But I don't think they could release their slaves. You had a gentleman on speaking about slavery to do with presidents, and I don't know if it was Washington or someone, during his wife's lifetime couldn't release the slaves, but later on did. And was there some kind of law or that if you had slaves, it was your responsibility during their lifetime to provide for them, or you couldn't release them under certain circumstances?
Thanks, Battle Creek.
There were different laws at different times in Virginia. Jefferson, during most of the time that Hemings would have been here, Jefferson could have freed slaves, but there was a law that said that anybody who was freed had to leave Virginia within a year after their emancipation. On the point about the 16-year-old, back to the age, I mean, if you think about the fact that a number of women died in childbirth, I mean, there are health issues involving women at this time. And so some people think that that accounts for the reasons that there were, the age of consent or the age of marriage was much lower at that time than what we think of. I mean, we sort of prolong childhood now, people are in their 30s, but certainly that age group would not have been unheard of for people to be involved with one another.
Annette Gordon-Reed has a history degree from Dartmouth, 1981, a Harvard Law degree in 1984, and teaches now at New York University.
New York Law School.
New York Law School. Is that connected with New York University?
No,
Oh, it
New
is?
York Law School. No, it's a separate private law school.
Not connected in any way? Who owns it?
No, well, they own themselves. They used to be a part of Columbia, and they had a fight back in the 1890s about the way of teaching law school, and they decided to go their separate ways. So we're downtown and they're uptown.
Where are you physically in New York City?
Battery Park City. Anytime you see a picture of the World Trade Center, you see my apartment building right there. They always take it from New Jersey, and we're right there on the water. So I'm all the way downtown in the old part of New York.
Are you teaching this semester?
Yes, I am.
How many students?
Between my two classes, I have 150.
Houston, Texas, you're next for Annette Gordon-Reed.
Thank you for your American Presidents program. I certainly enjoy it.
Thank you.
My question for Dr. Gordon-Reed. Dr. Reed, Jefferson's habits with women, it seems that the only evidence is about Miss Hemings as far as an out-of-marriage relationship, as far as I know, but perhaps you could enlighten me. Is his relationship both with his wife and as well as with Miss Hemings fairly monogamous, or was he something of a womanizer? Could you enlighten me on that? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you for your answer.
There's no indication that Jefferson was a womanizer. There was an incident that he admitted to where he sort of made a pass at a friend's wife when he was a young man. I think Andrew Burstein referred to before Maria Cosway, the sense that he may have had some flirtation with her when he was in Paris. She was married when he was in Paris. The dialogue of between my head and my heart is what he wrote to her, the famous letter he wrote to her. But other than that, there's no mention of Jefferson and other women. His wife and Sally Hemings, those are the only two any serious comments. So there's no sense at all that he was a womanizer. Hamilton had a reputation as a womanizer, Aaron Burr, but Jefferson was not, that was not his style, apparently.
St. Paul, St. Paul, Minnesota. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes. I would first of all like to commend Dr. Gordon-Reed for an extraordinary book. I think I was especially impressed with her legal training used as in an analysis of history. And I think it's a book that all of your readers, all of your listeners should really read, because I'm hearing people who are skeptics who do not wish to really hear another side of history, the history of slaves in America. And I strongly suggest that listeners read this book. It's an excellent book, and I think a lot of listeners are failing to hear one of the comments Dr. Reed constantly makes, that she wanted to present the Hemings story. And I think people have to understand that that is the part of the history that we need to be aware of. And I see this text and many other books as examples of the genre of slave stories about American history that we are just beginning to hear and to read about. Thank you so much for an excellent book.
Thank you very much.
When Thomas Jefferson lived here, and by the way, how many years did he live here?
Well, he lived here from the time you can do arithmetic and on television.
Well, just a rough
He's
idea.
25 to 83. He began work here when he was 25, so that's the sort of the lifespan of Monticello.
And when he was sitting in a room like this, how many people would be within a stone's throw of him in this area?
Well, certainly in his retirement, and any time he came back, there were lots of people who were here because he was very well known as a place that people came to for entertainment, and he sort of tried to escape from them to go to Poplar Forest sometimes, but there would always be lots of people around.
But I mean, how many people
Grandchildren,
worked in the slaves and all? Yeah, all around him.
It's hard to say because we don't have an accurate sense of who was in the household and who was doing what, but they were mainly Hemmings family people. There would have been a couple of dozen people around doing various things, artisans and people in the household. But he kept very good records about who was in what household, but we don't really know what the specific tasks of everybody was here. We know the butler, Burwell Colburn, was here, and John Hemmings, and but in terms of the household staff, it's really unclear.
On any given day when he was in retirement, where would Sally Hemmings be at a day like today?
I don't have any idea. I mean, there's a sense that she may have lived outside on the South Portico. Her job was, her son said, and other people mentioned, that she was the person who took care of his rooms, and depending upon how much time that took, she would be there. But I don't think we have a sense of what she would have been doing because there aren't any specific tasks that were assigned to her that we know of.
Patterson, New Jersey, you're next.
Hi. I want to thank the doctor for being there. She almost wants me to go to law school. I would like to learn from her. It seems that she's a person that you can learn a lot from. I was flipping the channels and I just stopped out of curiosity. Thomas Jefferson and Sally. In those days, I can understand a slave girl falling in love with a master. I can understand how people of my culture have a fear of feelings, deep-seated feelings, and not wanting to visit a plantation. I just wish they would not keep up so much controversy about it. I'm like another caller. It happened. Whether we're happy about it or unhappy about it, it's nothing that we can change. You know, history is history. All of our lives are supposed to be flagrant and interesting. In those days, had I been living in those days, I could almost feel a sense of those sort of things happening. As a matter of fact, it still happens today. There's so much that goes on that we don't know about. I'm just really happy and proud to see, not really meet, but to see and speak to Dr. Reed. I'm really glad that C-SPAN is doing these series on presidents. And I'm not a historian that would go out and research for anything, but I am always interested in history.
All right, thank you very much for calling. How have they treated you here at Monticello, and from your experience working with the Monticello folks, how open are they to all these controversies and dealing with these subjects?
Oh, they've been very open about it, and when I was preparing my book, I spent a lot of time here. When I said that I was coming down here, people sort of expressed some apprehension, thinking that it was going to be really hostile, but it hasn't been. It's been the very opposite of that. I think people here, they're professional, and they're interested really in the life of Thomas Jefferson. So it's been very good and been very, very open.
We have 8 minutes in this program to go. Santa Cruz, California. Annette Gordon-Reed, go ahead, please. Hello, Santa Cruz, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'd just like to put slavery into perspective with the day and age. Whenever we get into the talk of slavery, we never look at it from a global perspective. Back in the 7th century, when the rise of Islam came, that's really when the African slave trades first started. Before the transatlantic slave trade, it was to Africa. From Africa to the Middle East, where it was the largest forced migration in the world. And America's not the first democracy to own slaves. Greece, Rome, also owned a large slave population, and it probably helped do them in later on in their histories. But I just wanted to put it into perspective, because whenever we talk about this, we never we talk about it as if slavery is something white folk invented. And I know it's a stain on America's past, and it's still a cause of a lot of racial tensions in this day and age. And I think we have a hard time dealing with it here in Santa Cruz, California, where I live, where it's very radical in the politics. It's very radical left. In fact, it's pretty infamous for it. But at any rate, I'd just like to know about how you feel about how maybe what global slavery was like around that time. There were Caucasian Christian slaves in the Ottoman Empire. There would undoubtedly be black and Arab Muslims who would have owned Christian slaves. I mean, the Albanians and the Croats and some of the people that we're at war with right now are indicative of that. Anyway, I'll hang up and see what you have to say.
Oh, he's absolutely right. I teach a class called American Slavery and the Law, and one of the things that I'm trying to do now and will over the years sort of work up a comparative view of slavery. He's right. I mean, slavery was not invented on the American continent. We talk about it because it is something that's a continuing problem for us. I mean, we're not very far away from this in the span of history. I mean, this is only a couple of hundred years. I mean, the Roman slavery is fascinating. Slavery in Greek time is fascinating as well. But we're sort of the descendants of people who were slave owners and slaves. So it's alive for us in a way that ancient slavery is not. And so I think he's right to keep the perspective, and it's something that I want to do in my own scholarship, to try to bring that perspective to things that I want to write about and consider. But it's a particular moment to us because this is a part of our history. The founding of our nation made a compromise. The founders of our nation made a compromise with slavery, and that led to a civil war. I mean, these are big issues in the American consciousness, so they're not things I think that they're at the heart of a lot of dilemmas, and that's why we have to talk about them, even though we keep things in perspective, as he said.
A week from today, our bus will be at Montpelier, which is about 25 minutes from here, and we'll do another 2.5-hour program on James Madison. And then a week from Monday, we will be at the law offices of James Monroe, which are located in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and our bus will be there also. We'll continue this discussion through 41 different men. You can see on the screen that the third one we mentioned earlier is in Boston, Massachusetts on Sunday, April the 18th at 9 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. All of these are always repeated on Friday nights at 8 o'clock East Coast time for those of you who want to tape them and use them in your classroom, and they can be used in your classroom in perpetuity without any charge to you for copyright. Let's go to Washington, Missouri. You're next for Annette Gordon-Reed.
Yes, thank you. My name's Betty Scott, and I had basically always been told by my grandmother and my mother that we were descendants of Thomas Jefferson. I think probably that's the reason he's my hero today as far as anyone in history. I think, in fact, my grandmother's name was her maiden name was Jefferson. And I'm interested in trying to research, this area. I really have a suspicion because of some of the family characteristics and different things that it possibly could have been from Sally Hemings, that we were, supposed to be descendants of Jefferson. And I'm just very interested in trying to find out more about it.
Thanks.
You should contact Cinder Stanton, who was on just before I came on, because that's what they do for a living, Cinder and Diane, to try to track down people who are descendants of people who were enslaved at Monticello. So that's you have the right place to come to. Right, and here.
Cinder Stanton will be doing a chat room on our website if you're watching this live in about 12 minutes at noon, and you can find that at AmericanPresidents.org. All lower caps, or lowercase, it should be stated, American Presidents, one word, .org, and there will be a chat room with Cinder Stanton from Monticello. We also, before we sign off, we have one more call. We want to thank the folks at Adelphia Cable here in Monticello who have been a big help to us, and of course the very hospitable folks who work in and about Monticello, the guides and our original guests, and we started this program off, Dan Jordan, who has run this place, and been here since 1985. Let's go to our final call for Annette Gordon-Reed to Las Vegas, Nevada. Good morning.
Yes, my name is Mr. Cross, and I'm an African-American. And the thing that kind of disturbs me is that they had a caller earlier who was talking about Thomas Jefferson being a great man. Well, let's just say this, Holmes. We have got to understand that Indian people were slaughtered to create this, which created an evil karma that is on all of our shoulders today. That's why we're dealing with all these problems. So you cannot go and destroy a race of people to create your own country and then think everything's going to go smoothly. This is not a Brady Bunch society. We are living in seriously hard times, and we must wake up about the evil karma of the slaughtering of the Indians. I'm an African-American. The reason why I have good karma is because I'm screaming for the Indians. They're not here to enjoy everything you all people are enjoying. You people are trying to glorify some people who did an evil wrong that is on all of your shoulders today. So you people must wake up to that and start understanding about karma. Thank you very much.
Annette Gordon-Reed, final comment.
Well, he's right at one level. At another level, I mean, it's something, certainly what happened to Native Americans, what happened to blacks is something that should be kept in the forefront, and that's why I'm here. I mean, I want to bring these kinds of issues, the things that we could talk about, but not to dwell on just one thing. The American experience is large, and I think it should include the stories of all people, and that's what I would basically say to end.
Thank you, Annette Gordon-Reed.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you who have just joined us or have been with us, we have been inside the nickel, as they say here at Dan Jordan Land, and you can find Monticello on the face of the nickel. And we thank everyone associated with us today for joining us, and our callers, always good callers. That's it from Monticello near Charlottesville, Virginia.
Because Jefferson used it not only as a reading hall, but as his personal museum. He was concerned with no public education in Virginia.
Coming up, more on our nation's third president as a group of Thomas Jefferson descendants discuss Jefferson's slave Sally Hemings. At midnight Eastern.